Excuse me, your worship, you should be live.
Good. Thank you, Chris. All right, council, it's 2 o'clock. Time to get down to business. I see we have everyone present with the exception of Councillor Comey, who sent her regrets. I will start off reading the land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who cared for their families and communities the way we now seek to care for ours. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and respects all of the nation-to-nation agreements that have formed relationships with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. The reality of our shared history, the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community, and we seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of the diverse stakeholders in this area, and we seek to do better, to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda, and the motion reads that the content of the Strategic Initiative Standing Committee agenda for October 4, 2021 be adopted as presented. Can I get a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor McLeod. Excuse me, Councillor McLeod. Are there any changes, additions, or omissions on the agenda? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Council, any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that situation, please let us know in the general nature thereof. That brings us to item 4, which is deputations. And today we have one. It's the results of the Arts Center feasibility study. And we have Rob Hart, Chair of the Collingwood Arts and Culture Entertainment Group, CACE. Sarah, can we let in Mr. Hart, please?
Certainly, your worship.
Do we have Mr. Hart?
Through your worship, we do have a number of attendees today. So perhaps Mr. Hart does not, we can't recognize through the names identified in the attendee list. So if he is present, if he could please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, then we will promote you into the meeting discussions.
I see Erica Angus has popped up. Has Mr. Hart shown up?
No, we have not identified Mr. Hart. So maybe if we carry on with the agenda, and soon as he arrives.
I see Miss Angus has her hand up. So maybe you could just let her on and we'll get an update and then we will move on.
I believe, your worship, it could be an error because we've asked to unmute her and.
Hello.
Oh, is that Mr. Hart?
It is.
Good to see you, Mr. Hart. Well, we don't see you. We hear you.
That's good. I don't know why you don't see me. My camera is working.
All right. Well, if you're prepared to proceed with audio only, we're quite happy to do that. I don't know if you had a video presentation.
Let's start this. Oh, there I am.
Now we've got you. We have
now
you now.
Have me. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Hart. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
All right. Some few minor technical difficulties, but now we're off to go. We're off and going. So I will pass it over to you, and you have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, town staff, and citizens of Collingwood and South Georgian Bay. My name is Rob Hart, and I'm here today to represent the Collingwood Arts, Culture, Entertainment Group. or CACE for short. We are a group of 10 members, and I'm briefly going to just give their names out for the audience. Charlie Gadatis, founder of the Music on the Station in the Summer and South Georgian Bay Foundation. Thomas Vincent, developer, dreamer, and passionate citizen of Collingwood. Ann Schaefer, been in Collingwood for a number of years, well experienced in provincial government. Richard Lemoyne, the chair of Theatre Collingwood, accountant and ski organizer in town. John Kirby, ex-counselor, ex-educator in real estate, a third or fourth generation person in Collingwood. Hella Sandberg, who's been documenting arts history in Collingwood since the 50s. Erica Angus, executive director of theater in Collingwood. Jeff Shearer, general manager of On the Bay magazine, Classical 102.9, and one of the founders of the Institute of the South Georgian Bay. Donald Bromett, an entrepreneur, business owner, artist, and he's on the board for the Blue Mountain Foundation of the Arts. And myself, I've been in the arts business for 7 years in the leadership team of the Living Arts Center at Mississauga and many, many other endeavors previous to that. So as you can see, CACE is a grassroots local organization made up of citizens who volunteer their time and are dedicated and committed to building an arts, culture, and entertainment center in Collingwood for the enjoyment of the residents in Collingwood and the South Georgian Bay area. CACE was formed almost 3 years ago after many discussions around the need for an arts facility in Collingwood. To be clear, CACE is not a lobby group. CACE nor any of its members have any vested interest in the outcome of this project other than the well-being and growth of our community. Our vision is to establish Collingwood as the center for arts, culture, and entertainment in the South Georgian Bay area. Our mission is to build a world-class, adaptable, multi-purpose arts, culture, and entertainment center that is commercially viable, supporting local and regional talent while attracting world-class artists and productions to perform in our town. To support and promote many art forms and of all ages and abilities. To design and build a center that has adaptable space and facilities that will accommodate the needs of many organizations and cohorts. At the forefront of our mission are the cornerstones of the project: inclusivity, accessibility, sustainability, and community engagement. CACE established this position 3 years ago, and we continue to be convinced this is the approach needed for a sustainable facility that will meet the needs of the community currently and in the future. CACE would like to thank council and town staff for their support and recognition of the growth, development, and benefits of arts and culture to the community, and agreeing to move forward with investing in the feasibility study conducted by Nordis. The findings truly present us all with an opportunity to create a legacy facility second to none in South Georgian Bay area. Our community deserves it, and it's long overdue. Here are some of the reasons why an arts center is needed and, quite frankly, makes sense for our area. The wide range of benefits to a community that arts and culture bring far exceed its limitations. This is well researched and well documented. The World Health Organization, our federal and provincial governments, and many more organizations have published much research highlighting these benefits. International research conducted by the World Health Organization found evidence of the contribution, the role the arts play in improving overall health and well-being. The studies go into a great deal of depth around these benefits. The Ontario government conducted a study on the impact the arts have on the quality of life and well-being of Ontarians. 90% of the population believe arts are important in improving the quality of life in their communities. In terms of economic contribution, the Ontario government published the following. Arts and culture in Ontario directly contribute more than almost $27 billion annually to the provincial economy, representing 3.4% of Ontario's GDP. There are more than 277,000 culture jobs in Ontario, or 3.7% of total Ontario employment. 9.5 million overnight tourists participate in arts and culture activities while visiting in Ontario, generating $3.7 billion in GDP province-wide. Arts and culture tourists spend more and stay longer. The average Ontario arts and culture tourist spends twice as much per trip as a typical tourist and stays more than one night longer. 80% of Ontarians agree an active local arts scene helps communities attract business. There's much more data available. This is just provides a statistical snapshot of the importance of the arts. We could go on ad infinitum with that. The federal and provincial governments recognize that both the arts and tourist sectors of the economy have been very severely impacted by the pandemic. Both levels of government are currently in the process of allocating funds to these sectors for recovery and growth. In that mix is infrastructure funding. And our initiative is supportive of both arts and the tourism sector. And these funds will be available for the next 2 or 3 years or so. CACE has had the opportunity to review the Nordicity document and is excited over the possibilities presented. We believe the conclusions and recommendations are generally in line with our vision and mission that was stated previously to you. As such, we are ready to embrace moving forward to the next steps in a timely manner and welcome the opportunity to work with the town. We recognize there are further analysis needed, and CACE is ready to work collaboratively and expeditiously to accomplish this. How can we help? CACE can be a strong partner in this collaborative process. Consider experience in arts center management and facility needs, access to several experts in many aspects of the arts center development, experience in many aspects of the arts, strategic intellectual capital, as well as business and marketing acumen, a developed fundraising strategy created by funding experts, contact with a list of potential donors and supporters, a conduit to the community with a profile recognized by the community members. CACE has a desire to build a sustainable legacy facility, the arts jewel of South Georgian Bay. Use us. We're eager to contribute. We recognize the staff support will be presented later in the meeting, but we must address a major concern on behalf of the community. Mr. Mayor, honorable members of council, this is the time to put a stake in the ground for a proposed completion date of a new facility and create a work back schedule to meet that date. The next stage is not determining if we should build an arts center, but what arts center we should build and when. To that end, an independent project development manager specifically focused on this project and a working committee is needed now, not in 2023, in order to accomplish what is needed to be done and execute the needed steps to successful completion. This is not meant as a reflection of the capabilities of our town staff. On the contrary, we recognize the tremendous effort that is required to embark on the next steps, and the staff's ongoing workload is reflected in the long lead time. We're also mindful that we have 2 elections in 2022, each with its own set of pressures. An arts center project of this magnitude needs to be outside of the normal scope of work of town staff. This could possibly be the largest project built in Collingwood by the town to date. We would be hard pressed to find a community that relied on their already at capacity staff to take on such a large legacy initiative. It is our understanding the town.
We're kind of up to curtain time for you. So if you can just wind up your comments, please, it'd be appreciated.
Okay, very quickly. It is our understanding the town has set aside some money, $1.5 million for arts and culture of the 18 million gained. Some of these funds would be well spent supporting the project resources and reducing timelines set aside by the staff. Spending more than a year to rationalize, research, do business analysis to complete next steps does not mirror the level of community support for a new arts center. The desire of an arts center was strongly supported by 95% of the 1,600 in the community. It has been a long 3 years to getting to this point. Let's not drain the energy and impetus created by the positive outcome of the feasibility study. We believe not acting now would be seen in a poor light. Enthusiasm, excitement, and momentum are in the community now. Let's harness those dynamics. CACE is at the ready to work with the town to complete the next steps over the coming few months to bring the vision of a center for arts, culture, and entertainment to reality. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hart, and thank you to you and your committee for all the hard work and enthusiasm. It's much appreciated. Council, other questions or comments for Mr. Hart on the presentation? Seeing none, we, as you indicated, we have this item coming up in the agenda, and we invite you to stay for that discussion. Thank you again, Mr. Hart.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to item 5, which is the interim control bylaw update. And 5.1, I will pass it over to CAO Skinner. Go ahead, Sonia, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And per normal, there is a few slides, which I will just go through quickly. There's been a couple of updates this week, which I will point out to committee and the public. And I'll just pause for a moment as I can see clerks has started screen sharing, but can't see the presentation yet. Perfect. Next slide, please. So as you all likely know right now, each week, based on the instruction of council, we provide an update on the bullet points that are shown here, things like exemptions, building permits, remaining water supply. And this presentation does include those items. Next slide, please. So we've had a little bit of updates in our current situation. The water supply is safe and available. There's no concerns whatsoever with our water quality. And as soon as council was aware of this difficult situation, they took a proactive and transparent approach to seek further capacity and manage the remainder. And one of the first things that council authorized was a maximization of the chlorine. And with that, we have several years of growth available, but not quite enough to get us where we'd like to be with the expected end of 2025 or winter 25-26 plant expansion delivery. So we have used a tool called an interim control bylaw. And what it's done is temporarily and transparently pause development to ensure that the people of Collingwood have the water they need and that we grow as a complete community with a balance between things like housing and employment, et cetera. So I've updated this with staff support that all of the 2021 ready to go development applications have been approved. So if there were developers or people looking to, for example, add the secondary units, those have been approved. And most residential renovations and additions can continue. Just a simple addition is exempt from requiring a water approval, and you can get answers from our building department if you have any questions about what might need an exemption or not. And you'll see here that the land use policy study and the accelerated construction of our new plant are well underway. And council has approved an interim solution to add water in about 2023. I just wanted to pause here and ask the clerk's office, the way that I'm seeing the slides, they're partially cut off. Maybe that's just me. Oh, that's much better. Thank you. Next slide. So we have two major sections, although we're evolving into a building permit section at the end. So here, water capacity is the first one. So that would be water treatment capacity. Next slide. So we are moving forward with the selection of an ultraviolet UV manufacturer, and the RFP evaluation and negotiations are being finalized for the water treatment plant expansion. And that will allow us to support council in moving forward with an interim increase in water capacity that will even out our winter and summer amounts by about 2023, as I mentioned. And no other updates on that first bullet. The meeting with the districts of and the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks and our partner municipalities of Town of Blue Mountains and New Tecumseh did occur on September 29th. And I think there was good news from that meeting. Generally, the ministry, Director Slama has let me know that the ministry didn't have concerns with who had supplied water to the municipalities and any operational adjustments we might need to make to that they're on board with some flexibility as we had asked for. And we're no change to the last bullet. Next slide. Also, no changes to the progress on the drinking water treatment plant expansion. So the next things up are the preliminary design, which will be completed in the fall. And actually, we'll probably be able to color in on the top left, the second one down, the potential advanced disinfection UV, or at least the part where we've made the decision to move forward. And when it actually gets delivered, I guess we'll color it in up there. Next slide, please. So the remaining water supply here has not changed since last week. We have an allocation in single development units remaining right now of 495 until the end of 2025, or the max day demand, which is in meter cube per day at 447. We haven't yet reflected in this chart the advantages we will have with the addition of the UV disinfection in 2023. But we will think through how to present that for council and the public moving forward. That will even us out from summer and winter, and we'll be able to raise our capacity to that shown in the bottom two rows of this chart. And that adds, I can't do math that quickly, but 700 and some additional units that council can allocate to the needs of the people and developers in Collingwood. Next slide, please. So now is the second part, which is the land use planning policy study. So the planning side of the water solutions. Next slide. So there was a number of interim control bylaw exemptions, and those are shown on this slide. They're spread throughout town. Next slide, please. So the last decisions on those were made in July at council. And if you've been granted an exemption, your application can continue through the planning process and you can go for a building permit. If you've not been granted an exemption, all is not stopped. Your planning application can continue. However, planning decisions from council will not be made unless a future exemption is granted. The exemptions process, by the way, just to be immensely clear, is to get us through the land use planning study. Afterwards, pending council approval, water would be managed according to the study recommendations. So these exemptions are meant to be interim during the interim control bylaw. Next slide, please. So the land use planning policy study, the detailed schedule is here. We're almost on track. If you have really good eyes, you could see that line 5B is individual discussions with council. We had those scheduled for the week of September 20th. However, I understand that they're just being scheduled now. So hopefully council members have received opportunity to be interviewed. And I believe the consultant has indicated that things can still finish on time. Next slide, please. I've already talked about this piece, and so council members will be introduced to the interim findings of the consultant, and subsequent to this, we'll have the public and developer inputs. Next slide, please. So I renamed this slide to ask, is Collingwood's building industry busy? And I think the answer is as busy as they were last year, if not more so. So the numbers that are shown not in brackets are as of September 30th, so just a couple of days ago. The numbers that are shown in brackets are from a year ago as of September 30th. So if you look down the numbers of building applications, building permit applications received, issued, et cetera, you'll see we're on track more or less with where we were last year at this time. So while we're being very, very careful about the allocation of water and what we ask council to allocate, by no means has construction stopped in Collingwood. Next slide, please. This also shows the 12-month accumulated dwelling starts. So the dotted red line is the 3-year median, and the actual dwelling starts by a month is shown in the blue squiggly line. So you'll see that we're actually up from where we were in last year at this time. So that was around the dip in that blue line just past the center. We've gone a little bit below the median now at the very far right, but we do have 91 million in value of dwellings under construction, and we were only at 61 million under construction at this time in 2020. Next slide, please. This slide has been updated as well, and the building department, our chief building official, Greg Miller, has updated the building permits issued year to date for the end of September. And you'll see that we're a little below those issued in September last year, but we're still above the number issued at this time last year. Next slide, please. And as well, we have exempted 41 projects through council. 11 of them have building permits issued, or about 27%. And that's the dark blue. But the light blue is actually, or sorry, the light gray color on the left side, the 61% are 25 projects where developers or individuals could apply for building permits, and right now, if they were ready, and based on the exemption approvals, and they have not yet applied. And I'll just make note, there was a question last week from a council member about how many residential dwelling units these approvals represent, and staff are still seeking to make sure that they have that information and it's fully accurate. So I anticipate next week we would have that available. And I think that's the last slide. Next slide. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CAO Skinner. Council, are there any questions or comments on the presentation today? Seeing none, then we will move on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. And there are 2 items on the consent agenda today. The resolution reads as follows: the council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are those of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. And the 2 items are 6.1 Sue-Ann Gyles, proposed site of hospital redevelopment, and 6.2 NVCA 2022 draft budget. First, I'll look for a motion to receive the draft agenda, or the consent agenda, Councillor Berman and Councillor Madigan, and then I'll ask if there are any items that people would like to pull for conversation. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Are there any items that council would like to pull today? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 6.2, please.
Okay. Any other items, council? I will pull 6.1 then, but I'll start first with Councillor Hamlin. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I had a look at the 2022 budget for the NVCA that's on our agenda today. And I did have some questions, and thanks to our Councillor McLeod, who is of course also the chair of the NVCA, I did get some answers back, and she's been so great in quickly responding and answering my phone calls and so on. But I think I wanted to ask our own staff a question at this point, if I could. And through you, Mr. Mayor, perhaps to our CAO. My questions on this solely relate to the Pretty River Dike Maintenance Program. And I had asked the staff at NVCA whether, if there was an increase in budget, could we have more trees planted, more screenings, anything to make it a little more naturalized than it is. And by that, I mean, well, anyway, everyone knows what that means. So the response I got back was that no, vegetation hampers the flow of water, and we shouldn't be adding anything, including larger trees. So the question I had was whether our staff would think it worthwhile to ask for further directions from the NVCA staff around whether plantings could be helpful. I understand we don't want any impeding the flow of water. I totally get that. But perhaps up on the eastern bank, where there's been great screening provided, again, between our industrial and our trail and residential users, and even on the path itself, the trail itself, could we have more plantings? I know that we don't normally, get involved with the NVCA budget, and there's probably not much interest, but to my mind, this is one of the few major projects that I've seen that will have such a negative impact on what our communities used to having there. And I noticed in the budget that the NVCA kindly made available to us, about halfway through, they do have a lovely photo of what you'd expect a conservation area would look like. And it's a view of our Pretty River, the swimming hole there with all the trees and foliage. And of course, when the work's done, it will just be some rocks. But anyway, so that was my question. Long way of saying, is it worth for me to ask council to seek from the NVCA whether there's anything that can be done to, add to the naturalizing of this area after it's denuded?
Thank you for that. I'll look to CAO Skinner to put on her CA hat as well as her CAO hat. So go ahead, please, Tanya.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Hamlin. I have no concerns whatsoever to talking with NVCA staff further about plantings outside the water channel. I know the eastern bank is of concern. I know that they have talked about retaining the maximum that they can in that area, and we could even go back and talk to them again about whether there's some opportunity to have them, or even through a collaboration, make sure we've kept that beautiful trail as beautiful as it can be while mitigating our flood risk, which is very important. I know that, and I haven't had enough chance to look at all the details, but it's always a balance when you don't have a lot of property to balance the ability to convey water with the ability to have beautiful green spaces. And I think that through phase 2 of this project, which would happen, it was NVCA who'd commented about the phase 2, to do the work they need to do right away to make sure water can move through the channel, and then take a step back to look at how to best deal with the remaining vegetation and have it be as aesthetically and environmentally pleasing as it possibly can be. Was encouraging to hear that that conversation. So I don't feel I need instruction to go back and have a really good conversation with NVCA. Not that if you wish to give it, we'll certainly, of course, abide by it as well. But it's a good suggestion. I have no problem taking that back. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Any
That's so
follow-up,
great.
Councillor Hamlin?
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, we certainly saw the Pretty River spillway in action in the recent rainstorm. So I was very happy to see that it contained the waters. Councillor McLeod. I think we might have lost Councillor McLeod.
Nope, just hit the wrong button.
Okay, all right, you're back.
Just, yeah, I have done my best to explain things to Councillor Hamlin, but I would also encourage her to attend the NVCA's website, wherein they have posted the Q&A session that they held last week for anyone who had any further questions after the presentation that they made to us 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was.
Thank you. And I will pull item 6.1, which is the letter with the proposed site of the hospital redevelopment. I know that last council and this council have been very involved in supporting our hospital in their redevelopment, and certainly the recent announcement about the stage 1 approval and the $15 million for stage 2 planning and design processes, as well as an increase in the operating budget, is certainly recognition by the province of how important the hospital is for our community and for our region. And I'm going to ask Clerk Almus if she can just give a chronology and update of this council and previous council's efforts to work with the hospital to advance that stage 1 approval and the redevelopment process. Sarah?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. There has been a lot of misinformation, especially after the funding announcement to the hospital was received. So to provide some clarity, the town of Collingwood has and continues to support the Collingwood General Marine Hospital in its application to the province for a new hospital. Council recently put $2 million in a reserve in support of a new facility, the most pledged to date by any of the municipalities serviced by the hospital. Collingwood was the only municipality of the 5 to commit funds in support of the development process when we committed $150,000 in 2017 towards the stage 1 process. In response to our local MPP Jim Wilson's request, the Mayor's office sent a letter dated October 26th of 2020 to Premier Ford and Minister Elliott in support of a new hospital with Council's unanimous support. In August of 2018, Council even passed a resolution unanimously to request a ministerial zoning order from the province that would designate the Poplar Side Road site as the hospital redevelopment site and avoid the requirement of planning applications and processes, including a comprehensive review to convert those lands from the current employment lands designation. Minister Clark in turn responded in November of 2018, indicating at that time the request was premature until the hospital had proceeded further into the planning and approval process. Now the hospital is moving to stage 2 of the stage 5 redevelopment process with a grant of more than $15 million for planning and design that was received from the province this summer. As Council continues to support the hospital in its efforts to get Collingwood and the surrounding region the much needed new state-of-the-art hospital, Council has to be very cautious as Collingwood Council is the planning approval authority, which is unlike our neighboring municipalities. And Collingwood Council cannot be seen as prejudicing the planning approval processes necessary for new development at the Greenfield site on Poplar Side Road. If the planning process is prejudiced, it could delay the hospital's future planning approvals should there be any appeals to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Hopefully, this provides some clarification to the public regarding this misinformation that was relayed or inferred during the media when the hospital funding was announced, and provides some assurity to the public on Council's commitment to the Collingwood Hospital.
Very much, Sarah. Council, any questions or comments on that? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you to Clerk Almus for that clarification. During the announcement, as she said, there was a lot of maybe misinformation that came out, but it did end with our current MPP basically challenging, as I heard it, our council to come out with a ringing endorsement of a new hospital on the Poplar Road site. And so I'm wondering whether this information that through you, Mr. Mayor, to Clerk Almas, this information you've relayed this morning or this afternoon has been put in a letter yet to the Minister of Health. And I appreciate that the request for the MZO went to the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, but I'm wondering if anything's been sent directly to the Minister of Health, including that request.
Well, I can certainly indicate that in October of last year, we did send on a letter of absolute endorsement of the new hospital development in October, which was done with the unanimous approval of council. And I can indicate that the CAO and I have had a number of meetings with the hospital CEO and board chair, as well as with the neighboring mayors in our roundtable forum. And at this point in time, we are completely in lockstep with the hospital, and we have asked that they notify us when they want our support. They're just starting in on phase 2, which is CEO Holder has indicated is a 12 to 18 month process, and they have to get some studies done at the outset. And so we've made a request that they advise us when they need our action, and then we will certainly bring it back to council.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that brings us then to item 7, which is staff reports. And item 7.1 is C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces. And this is a long standing report that's been instigated by the JI. And I'm going to pass it over to Clerk Almas to introduce. Sarah?
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of the committee. I'd like to invite Manager Truman in, as well as we have our integrity commissioners present as well. And I'll just provide a brief introduction. I'd like to personally thank our previous accountability officer, Jocelyn McCauley, for starting this process. And as you can see from this document, it's a comprehensive document that Manager Truman, as soon as he joined our team, jumped in and spearheaded the final research that was necessary and putting all the plans into place, ensuring that all of the recommendations were thoughtfully considered that were provided through our judicial inquiry. The document has, with thanks to our integrity commissioners, principals integrity, been vetted through their office for consideration and incorporation into the final document. And you'll note that they're here present. So if there's any questions regarding interpretation that they may be able to assist in addressing, we welcome their participation. So with that, I'll let Manager Truman start the formal presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Over to you, Manager Truman.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just waiting for the slideshow to appear. Okay, thank you very much. And so starting with the next slide, please. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I just wanted to provide a quick background on how we found ourselves here. So the town of Collingwood's initial code of ethics was created in 2007, and at the time was quite a trailblazing document, as it was created before Ontario's Municipal Act required municipalities to do so. That code of ethics stayed in place until 2015, when our current code of ethics, our code of conduct for council, local board, and committee members was enacted. And then in fall of 2020, the Collingwood Judicial Inquiry Report was released and highlighted several key areas of improvement for the town's code of conduct document. And in order to strengthen our commitment to transparency and accountability, the 2021 code of conduct draft is reflective of these key considerations. Next slide, please. So how we created this document, town staff analyzed the judicial inquiry report, looked into our own policies, investigated how we operate, and synthesized a comprehensive and cutting-edge code of conduct proposal that we believe will be a leading document within Ontario municipalities. Town staff isolated 52 specific recommendations pertaining to our code of conduct. And a judicial scan was completed using the judicial inquiry report to highlight several of the municipal codes that we should be referencing and using as a jumping off point. So as you can see, we use the city of Ottawa, city of Mississauga, the county of Simcoe, the city of Vaughan, and the city of Barrie. Of the 52 recommendations that we did find, 50 of them currently are housed within this draft of the Code of Conduct. Next slide, please. So one of the major changes you'll see is that we now actually set out official rules. There's 18 in total, and this is to provide clarity and a strong focus on accountability and transparency in this document, and also provide clear direction to members and anyone using this document. Next slide, please. Some other key additions and other key changes in this document contains several new definitions that were updated based on recommendations from the judicial inquiry report. Some of those definitions are around definitions around family members, for example. Also, commentary has been included in almost all of the rules, and they provide helpful context and hypothetical examples of applying these rules. And also, there is a new updated role in all the procedures for our integrity commissioner. And also, there is also language that has been included around suggested penalties for infractions under the Code of Conduct. And another item I wanted to mention, it's not on the slide, is also a new streamlined complaints process has been added with an easier to use form and clearer kind of guidelines on how to use this and how to interact with it for anybody in the public. Next slide, please. Another change is that our Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task force has been removed. It is currently housed in our current Code of Conduct, the 2015 version. We have removed that and created its own Code of Conduct document. We felt that a separate document for advisory committees and task force could provide greater transparency and understanding for the expectations of these members. And this is the code document is slightly less complex than the one for council members, but this is due to the groups do not have the ability to make independent decisions. They only provide advice and recommendations. Next slide, please. So to create this document so far, the initial draft has been shared with the town CAO, department heads, several managers and staff, as well as our independent integrity commissioner, which Clerk almost mentioned, who are present as well for today's meeting. And we are now bringing a proposed foundational document that will be brought to the public and council for additional recommendations and comments. Next slide, please. And on to next steps. With your approval, the town would like to start the public consultation on the draft provided. We plan to use the Engage Collingwood page, and staff is requesting a 7-day period to allow for civic input. After the consultation period is ended, staff will collect all of the input and begin reviewing and evaluating these ideas for merit and provide recommendations to council for adjustments. Our aim is to have a final version of the Code of Conduct ready to be passed later this month. Once endorsed by council, we plan to share our document with other municipal organizations such as the AMO and the OMAA. And then the last slide is just any questions.
Thank you very much, Manager Truman. Sarah, I'm going to ask if there's anyone from our public who would like to comment on the presentation we've just received.
Thank you, Your Worship. If you are attending today's meeting and you wish to speak to the recommendations in this staff report, please press the raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're participating via telephone, please press *9. At this point, Your Worship, it does not look like any of the attendees wish to address council or the standing committee regarding the staff report.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll read in the resolution, and it reads as follows: that staff report C 2021-17, 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces be received, and that the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee herein endorse the draft Town of Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees, and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for advisory committees and task forces, and authorize staff to conduct public consultation prior to this staff report being considered by council. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Madigan and Councillor Berman. Council, are there questions or comments on the proposed Code of Conduct? Councillor Berman.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I don't know how you want to do this. I can go through page by page with my notes and just ask for clarification on whether some of the things would be amendments or if I just need an explanation, however you'd like to handle it.
Get started and
Okay.
we'll see how we go.
So as far as the, I guess through you to the clerk, starting off with the recommendation, which is in two parts. I want to know whether the report that's going to go to the public, is it going to be what's in front of me now, or is it going to include any amendments that come out of today's meeting?
Clerk Thomas.
Thank you. Actually, through your worship to Councillor Berman, that's a very great point. We wanted council to provide any sort of recommendations now that they would endorse in this draft document that would be shared with the public. So any amendments made here today would be the amendments that are reviewed by the public.
Okay. Okay, no, that's good on the first one. Go through the pages. I believe I know the answer to this, but there is still, we've done procedural bylaw today, we're doing code of conduct. Through you to the clerk, there's still a report coming next month to finalize the JI, the 1 year review that was required. Okay, thank you. Next, you recommended against that. A question on number 52, and it might go through you to whoever's here from principals, but I'll let you decide that. I'm wondering if there's a happy median between filing a complaint and just trying to maybe educate or correct something that one of my colleagues has done. So in other words, if I see somebody at a council meeting that has, simply forgotten that they have a kid as part of an organization or something like that, I don't want to file a code of conduct complaint against them, but there's no intermediary step to simply maybe get a ruling as to something, whether it was right or wrong, and make it a teachable moment. I just don't know if that's possible. If somebody,
certainly, unless Mr. Abrams would like to address that. My initial comment is that we do have the informal complaint resolution component as well, but I'll let Mr. Abrams address the question.
Thank you. Mr. Abrams.
Thank you, Mayor. The clerk is quite right. There are two parts to the investigation protocol. One is an informal mechanism and the other is the formal mechanism. But even if a complaint were to proceed under the formal mechanism, we still favor opportunities to achieve an informal resolution to a matter, short of a public report out. And so what you have before you today is a very structured document. I wonder if I could just take a brief moment to step back and speak to the role of integrity commissioners generally, because we have very wide responsibilities ranging from assisting you today on adopting an ethical standard to education and training. As you've heard me say before, the most important aspect we think is providing advice. And then as a residual thing, we are the independent party to whom complaints would be made about the ethical behavior of yourself or other appointed officials. And I mention that because it's all part of a scheme, and the scheme in the best sense of the word. In other words, that the parts work together. We see codes of conduct as most appropriately guides to good behavior, not traps to hold somebody to account if they put a toenail over an ethical line. And so our attitude in administering the code, any complaint that would come forward the code, is firstly to look at, to see if there is a way to remediate, to have an acknowledgement, to achieve an informal resolution. And that is certainly possible in a question posed by Councillor Berman. Do I actually have to file a formal complaint in order to achieve that kind of outcome? Well, the answer is maybe not. And I pose it that way in that, we're there to help. There may well be circumstances where a member of council can call us up and say, look, I've got this. This is what I think should be the outcome. I don't really want to go to a formal complaint. And we can, if we can, engage and seek out an informal resolution in those circumstances. So it's a very structured document, but there's an attitudinal component to this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams. Follow up, Councillor Berman.
Just thank you. Your final thought on that is actually the answer I was looking for, so that's perfect. Next, I guess through you to the clerk, probably there is some inconsistency in here, and I just wondered what the intent was on the training of people that are going to run for office, whether your intent is to make it mandatory or volunteer, because some of the wording when it's addressed more than once leaves me unclear what your intent is.
Comments?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. I'll have to see where the inconsistency, arises from. I believe staff feel that it's important to always have candidate training in advance of an election, so they understand the responsibilities and ethical conduct that's expected of our elected officials. We can't make it a mandatory requirement for candidates to undertake that training. However, again, as I said, it would be highly recommended.
It's just a point of clarification, though. Once a council member is elected, it does become mandatory.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Jeffrey, did you want to just jump in on this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just specific to that, is there a process whereby those who do participate can be highlighted as having done so on the website, as opposed to just letting it go? Like, I think that that's important information for the voters, for sure. I just I would have expected it had to be mandatory, but I just wondered if there was another way around it by positively supporting those who did it.
Comments?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. And I can appreciate Councillor Jeffrey's comments regarding that. I think it's a balance on potentially, privacy issues as well. Should a candidate be interested in participating and then decide not, participate and then decide not to file papers, that could be something that we consider before we bring back the final report.
Okay. Any follow-up, Councillor?
No,
Jeffrey?
that's great. Just to consider, and maybe only those who do end up filing their papers to say that they did complete that course somehow. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Yeah, and thanks for the clarification. I was looking at, for example, number 59 that says newly elected Collingwood council members, training and education, blah, blah, blah. Integrity commissioner should be mandatory and occur promptly after the election. And there was a lot of that in there. So I would be in favor of making it mandatory if we're allowed to make it mandatory, and that would be for people that are already elected and people that are doing the education session beforehand. But I don't know whether we're allowed to. It seems like you're saying we're not allowed to require it to be mandatory.
Thomas?
Certainly, I can speak to this, and then maybe Mr. Abrams would like to also jump in, because we did have actually a detailed conversation with him regarding this provision about making it mandatory to undertake training. Circumstances can happen where an individual may not be present, for extenuating circumstances. We talked about the process, should that happen, is there an opportunity that the session be recorded and they be required to watch it, so at least they understand the nuances that were discussed. Again, participating, by watching it, not being able to be interactive within that conversation is a little bit different. You don't get the same training experience. However, that training is not a mandatory training of the Municipal Elections Act or the Municipal Act that requires you to hold office, that you must take the training. Maybe I'll let Mr. Abrams speak, obviously as he is the adjudicator on these matters, what his further position is on this piece.
Certainly, yes, there are really two components, just to enhance on what the clerk is saying. We're talking on the one hand about training of candidates as if it's a matter of qualification for a candidate. You can't be elected unless you take the training. That's the mandatory piece. And the presence, the availability of training for those candidates. And then I guess the third component would be whether a member of council is obliged to take the training. So there isn't at present no provision in the Municipal Elections Act which makes it a requirement for candidates to take training, but there is a groundswell of support. There are a number of recommendations, the inquiry recommendation being only one of them, that suggest that training be offered to persons seeking municipal office. We've made that recommendation to the consultations on codes of conduct. We've suggested to our clients, for example, that maybe it's a good idea that they partner together, within the same territory and share the cost of a training session to, make it robust enough for individuals to attend. So it's a good thing, but there does not seem to be a path to making it mandatory at this stage. I would read the inquiry's recommendation as being a recommendation to the province to consider making it a mandatory provision or an aspect of qualification, and it will be in their hands as to whether that is an eventual outcome.
Thank you for that. Are you able to comment about making it mandatory once a council member is elected?
Yeah, I think there were ways to make it as if it were mandatory. I don't know. Again, it's not a condition of office, and so it's hard to envision, except through the code of conduct, or it's hard to envision it as being a mandatory condition of maintaining one's office, one's role in council. That said, encouraging it to be available is very much appropriate. What concerned me about in an earlier draft about making it mandatory is that life goes on, members, and if you happen to miss the scheduled training session, there would have to be some kind of accommodation to give you an opportunity to be trained at a later time. And training can take on different forms, of course. It can take on a sort of classroom setting. It can be one-on-one. It can come about as a result of advice or even a recommendation report. It can occur in various ways. So my suggestion is that it be left as is in your code. It's actually a direction to us as your integrity commissioner to provide training to candidates. It's part of our work plan to provide training as often as we can to members of council. And if you have ultimately a member of council who refuses to take any kind of training, we look at that in terms of whether or not they're fulfilling their obligation to diligently serve council. Once again, this isn't a trap, it's a guide. And so we would hope to see training as a very useful opportunity for members of council. Frankly, an opportunity for members of council who disagree with provisions in a code of conduct to raise those very thoughts and to engage in a debate on it. So I don't know that we need to go that far as to make it mandatory, absolutely 100% mandatory for members of council in the code of conduct, because everything is geared to providing education and training to elected officials on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Thank you. On page 15, number 4, it says elected officials seeking clarification, guidance, or advice of any part of this code should consult with the integrity commissioner. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't add in that no other party, because during the judicial inquiry, we were shown that some members of that council came to the clerk to ask and then kind of maybe misrepresented her opinion, but now that we have the integrity commissioner, should that be the only source that can make a predetermined ruling like that?
If the question is to me, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer it.
Go ahead.
So this parallels our discussion of a few moments ago about informal procedures on complaints. Really, anybody with relatively sharp elbows can encourage a member to proceed in an ethical manner. Your colleagues on council, professional staff, there's nothing wrong with them providing the advice. I mean, but what they cannot do is provide advice that, what we like to say, is bulletproofs you. So it used to be the case that on conflict of interest matters, for example, and still should be the case, that members would ask the clerk, hey, do I have a conflict on this item? And the clerk would say, this notional clerk, I'm not saying Sarah, this notional clerk would say, I can't help you. This is about you in your personal capacity. You have to go and seek your own lawyer's advice on that sort of thing. Well, it's now the case that you can reach out to the integrity commissioner for the advice. And when we provide the advice, it is binding upon us, therefore it bulletproofs you. In other words, if somebody were to later complain and you had already received our advice and you were following our advice, well, a complaint can't be sustained. And taking it a step further, even in the extraordinary circumstances where a complaint might proceed to the courts and not through us, the court would be looking at our advice. And it is almost impossible to conceive of a court that is going to sanction a counselor for following the advice of their integrity commissioner. So my message is it's a very good idea to seek the advice of the integrity commissioner, but you need not be tracking us down for every piece of advice you might need that relates to your ethical considerations. A colleague may well have gone through this. You know this. Nothing wrong with reaching out. Nothing wrong with reaching out to a member of professional staff on their interpretation of a policy or something else. But I would encourage you in any gray area where there's any notion that there might be something tricky or the circumstances are special or the stakes are really high, I would encourage anyone to come to us for some advice.
Thank you. Councillor Berman.
Just about done. I wondered on the, and I had some experience with this that clerk may remember. So it's under the informal complaint procedure, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe there's a requirement for the recipient to acknowledge that they've at least received the informal complaint. And I know even before I was on council, I knew that to be the case. I wondered if A, am I correct? And
well, I can answer that again.
Okay, all right.
The informal complaint procedure is an informal complaint procedure. There's no obligation on any party to make it work. There's no obligation on anyone to acknowledge that they've been engaged in it.
Okay, so if I send an informal complaint to party A, I can be left guessing whether they've even got it, because there's no requirement for them to just say received. And that doesn't make sense to me, but is there a reason that can't happen? Just a simple acknowledgement of receipt?
Well, it's a flexible, informal arrangement, Councillor. If you choose to proceed along an informal path, you accept that you're attempting to engage in a conversation in which will result in some sort of resolution of the matter. That may not be achieved, and so I don't think you would want to make all sorts of rules and attach them to an informal procedure.
No, that was the only one that I would have suggested. Okay, I'm good then for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Berman. Council, any other questions or comments? Councillor McLeod, go ahead.
I do believe I saw Councillor Hamlin's card up earlier, so I would not want to take her place in the queue.
Well, you go ahead and then I'll come back to Councillor Hamlin. I didn't see your card, so I will follow up with her. Thank you.
Okay. So I have a fair amount to say about this report. First off is a whole bunch of praise for our staff for having to wade through the 900 and some odd page report from Justice Morocco and the 306 recommendations that came out of the report. And I just want to be sure that when we're talking about some of the changes that have been proposed here, that there is basically a straight line between some of the recommendations and the changes that are coming. So, and examples that can be cited from the JI. So I'm looking at the list, not in the actual draft proposed, but in the staff report which precedes it. The checklist, recommendation 33, the code should explicitly state that no council member shall use or attempt to use their authority or influence to threaten, coerce, intimidate, command, or otherwise influence any staff member. And I'm assuming that this recommendation is connected to the testimony of former CAO Kim Wingrove, who's cited on page 122 of volume 2 of the report as saying that Councillor Ian Chadwick was a significant critic of hers who, quote, spent a lot of time just sending me emails or asking for clarification and critiquing my work? Or is that more connected to page 35 of volume 2, where Clerk Almas testified that Mr. Lloyd, quote, intimidated and bullied Ms. Wingrove? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
There's probably multiple examples in there, but Clerk Almas, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor McLeod. There's a number of correlations, to all the recommendations through the entire 900 and some pages that was of the JI. So we took the recommendations, we took the references to that are provided, in the appendices to, the different recommended areas that the justice was looking at when he was making those recommendations. Obviously, I have a complete understanding of what happened during the event. So we're not attributing the recommendation number to a specific section necessarily within the full judicial inquiry report document.
But it is, thank you, and through you, though, there is a way to infer what incidents are connected to some of these things. For example, I'm looking at recommendation 35, code of conduct should prohibit councillors from accepting gifts, favors, entertainment, meals, trips, or benefits from any kind of lobbyist. And I'm assuming that recommendation might have prevented the members of the 2010 to 2014 council from accepting trips to Florida to stay at the condo owned by Paul Bonwick, who was working for PowerStream on the Collis deal, or perhaps while he was working for BLT to secure the contract for the recreation facilities.
Almas.
Sorry, Your Worship, through to Councillor McLeod. I don't know. I honestly, I don't know how to answer that question. If that's more of a statement or a question.
Go ahead, Mr. Abrams.
Well, the codes of conduct have evolved over time. And certainly Collingwood had adopted one. It's not quite some time ago when the adoption of municipal code of conduct was something special. But they are more or less routine and now they're mandatory. This particular code, Genesis, the base of it is a code document that we promote to our clients, make it available for them, and it's been adapted for Collingwood's use here. And the code, because it's based upon the experience of so many municipalities over so many years, who have suffered the kinds of things that the inquiry spoke to, it already addresses in different places those core things of good behavior, respectful workplace, avoidance of influence. It also includes some rather, call them more modern aspects, and the inquiry's already seen them. We've seen them in action in other places like Simcoe that deal with the avoidance of conflicts of interest. And so if I understand your line of questioning, the code was not built based upon a stepwise reaction to the recommendations of the inquiry. The code is a functioning document, the four corners of it anyways. And then the analysis was, okay, is there a gap? Is there a connection? Is there a nexus to what the inquiry recommended? Or indeed, are there things that don't fit, that ought not to be put into the code of conduct? So I wonder if that helps. If you're looking at a stepwise connection between the recommendations and provisions in the code, that would be a big exercise. But staff have, to their credit, identified in the code points of connection, and there are others, of course, as well.
I guess what can be said, Councillor, is that there were findings by the judicial inquiry that were clearly outside the normal standards of good conduct and transparency by a council. And so to the extent that you can relate those findings to specific code provisions, then the nexus is there.
Right. Thank you. That's excellent. I also want to praise staff for all the stuff that is actually, it looks to me from that chart, already been done. For example, I remember the training that I received when I was being trained as a new counselor, and I have sought guidance from our integrity commissioner, and I've listened to the annual reports, and I remember signing the acknowledgement of our code of conduct. So I think it's pretty impressive that we're so that our staff is so proactive prior to this. I do have some comments and questions and possibly an amendment or two regarding the two items that are not recommended from that checklist. And one of them is the regarding financial disclosure. And I'm interested in this one because it kind of goes to the heart of what the JI was about, which is, of course, conflicts of interest. And page 22 of volume 1 talks about how there were 3 members of that council who had undeclared conflicts. The mayor whose brother benefited from the 2 deals, the deputy mayor, and the councillor who it was revealed was receiving $700 a month in payment between August of just 2011 and February of 2012, and then again from February 2012 to April of 2014. Sorry, check that. August of 2011 to December of 2011, and then again from February 2012 to April of 2014. That's on page 131 of volume 1. The public should have known that a councillor was receiving $700 a month from a lobbyist who was the mayor's brother. And I want to ensure that that sort of thing never can happen again. And so I want to amend this report to try to find a way that we can have simple, at least some method of financial disclosure, which still manages to respect privacy. And I wonder if Mr. Abrams could speak to that, if there is a way to do that, because I personally would like to see every one of the recommendations from the report that cost us so dearly implemented. And I'd like to find a way that we can do it respectfully to future councillors. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think, to Mr. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Abrams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So there is a public policy debate, not for us to determine which side of that debate should win or not, but there's a public policy debate that centers around whether it is appropriate for there to be a rule that people seeking public office must disclose their wealth, their holdings, their however you would go about doing that. Is it a good thing to require that? And it may certainly cure some evils, but would it also tend to discourage people seeking office? Would it make public service the realm of the elite, or the reverse? That's the public policy debate. And I happen to share a caution. Where I land in that personally, so not as your integrity commissioner, where I land personally is that it's a bit concerning to me because it would, I think, discourage individuals from participating. It's currently not a requirement. We had the discussion about training a few moments ago, and the same considerations would apply to personal financial disclosure. But I'll hasten to add that the code of conduct before you speaks to some of the issues that were present in the inquiry. such as a strict reliance on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act as full guidance on your obligation to avoid conflicts of interest. We now know that that's not the case. The Act is quite limited in scope, and the code before you talks about avoidance of conflicts of interest. That includes a disqualifying interest under the code would include, of course, anything that would violate the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. That's a provincial statute. None of us can do anything about it. But it also draws in the common law. And so, for example, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act deems to be your indirect interest any pecuniary interest held by your spouse or your child or your parent. Notably, sibling is not included in that list. And so, as you know, that creates a gap under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, but it has always been present in the general legal understanding of what a conflict of interest is when you act in a manner in which your personal private interest competes with your public duty. So in other words, yeah, if your sibling is intrinsically involved in the matter, a reasonable person, which is the test, a reasonable person fully aware of all the facts and circumstances, relevant facts and circumstances, would have to conclude that if you're aware of your sibling's involvement in the matter, you have to step away. And in fact, we provided a report before the inquiry to your council quite some time ago that spoke to that very issue. So in our view, it's not necessary to go so far as to make it mandatory that there be full financial disclosure. Because A, there's this valid public policy discussion on whether it's a good thing, and B, is it really necessary given the other provisions in the Code of Conduct which speak to the same concern?
Thank you. Just a sec, Councillor McLeod. Councillor Jeffrey, you had your card up. Was it to this point?
It was. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Anderson.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I find Councillor McLeod's question intriguing in terms of another way. In a former life, as an employee of a national advertising agency, I had to file annually my involvement in all organizations, charities, or whatever that was held on file with them, because it was their way of monitoring my activity within the sales component. And so my thought would go to a necessary mandatory list to go to the clerk, that not necessarily the amount, but the source. So I would file, I have a sole proprietorship, I have a corporation, and that's where my income comes from. But you don't stipulate how much it is or what it is, or it's just to allow some connections to be made and on file. And it actually is a reminder of the things you have to keep front and center when you're considering your declarations and your responsibilities going forward. So I don't know if that adds anything to the conversation, but it's kind of where my thoughts went.
Mr. Abrams, any comments?
Well, as I said, there's a public policy debate about this, and certainly hear Councillor Jeffrey's comments. They're valid ones. What I know to be the case is that the analysis of conflict of interest matters is quite complicated. It involves not only your own holdings, members of council, there's indirect interest. It could well be a temporary matter that arises and dissipates that you would have no idea would exist in the future at the time you filed your declaration. So I think it would be imperfect. It would not achieve your objective, but I do believe that there is lots in this code that would assist in dealing with those very concerning circumstances where a member is engaging in a matter when a reasonable person fully apprised of the facts and circumstances would say, wait a second, this can't be proper. You can't separate your own interest from your public duty in these circumstances. And that's an objective test, by the way. So even if you were superhuman and you were able to separate your personal interests from your public duty, the objective test would say, well, no, that doesn't appear to be the case, the reasonable person would conclude that you have to be impacted by the fact that your sibling is, pardon me, is part of this package, even though you say, no, I'm not affected by that.
Thank you. Mr. McLeod, back to you.
Thank you. I'm not 100% convinced, because I think that it hinges on fully aware, reasonable person, fully aware. And I think that it's about awareness. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's about the self-reporting for me. And what we found is that 2010 to 2014, there wasn't the reporting. So that's where I'm at. But I think I can leave that point for this moment. But I also want to talk about the second one that is not included in the list of things we're doing. Item number 53, the Integrity Commissioner says there's no code of conduct jurisdiction over former councillors, but former councillors are referenced several times throughout the course of this draft report. Rule 4, Section 7, the maintenance of confidentiality does not cease when a member ceases to be a member. Which I'm assuming comes from recommendation 47, which is accepted. So I'd like to make sure that everything is aligned. So if former councillors can't be held to account by the code of conduct, should we be saying elsewhere in the code of conduct that former councillors have an obligation?
Just for clarification, I think your former council should not accept employment for 1 year on specific matters in which they worked as an elected official. Is that the one you're referring to? It's item 51.
No, 53.
53. Well, 51 was the other item that was not. 53 was accepted.
Oh, drat. Have I misread my own notes? It's probably my handwriting. The point remains, though, about former councillors and are they obliged to remain part of this code of conduct?
I think there are aspects that they are. For example, for confidential information, anything you've learned while in office, you cannot disclose even after you're out of office. And there may be other items, but so I'll let Mr. Abrams respond to that. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. It's an excellent question, and certainly you wouldn't lose your obligation to maintain the confidentiality of the municipal corporation once you left office. So the confidential information remains confidential information. The mechanism to enforce that might be difficult. I'd have to look at it, but we may well be able to investigate and reprimand you for doing that. That would be novel. We certainly couldn't recommend the suspension of your pay because you wouldn't be any longer be paid by the municipalities. There are practical concerns with that. With respect to future employment, I think where staff and we left the last discussion was there ought to be some close attention paid to a legal opinion, whether or not the municipality is capable of restraining a person from future employment by virtue of their past employment as a member of council. That speaks to both the condition itself and the length of time that would have to elapse before it was permissible again. So it may be something you wish to pursue further, but I would recommend that part of that pursuit include some legal advice on whether or not it is possible to do in a code of conduct.
Thank you. Follow up, Councillor.
Thank you. So I think those are the only things regarding the chart. I do have a couple of comments and questions regarding the rules themselves. I know I am cognizant that I have taken up a fair amount of time, but I really think this is very important stuff, and I am grateful for the indulgence of this council. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Clerk Almas, when the public is receiving this report for its comment, will it be receiving the commentary that is connected to it? In the copy that I downloaded, there's all sorts of commentary.
Sarah?
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, definitely the commentary will be included. Actually, this was a big recommendation of our integrity commissioners to incorporate practical application through commentary. And yes, that will form part of the final document.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask for a couple of amendments to the commentary. However, I will get to that in a minute. Are we contemplating under rule number 1, section number 2, are we contemplating some sort of a form that needs to be filled out for disclosures of connections to nonprofit corporations and so on? Or is that merely that we seek the advice of the integrity commissioner? I'm hoping to do these in order so that we don't have to scramble through the document. I'm trying to be sensible of your time and attention.
Sarah?
Certainly, I'm not sure if this is maybe one that Manager Truman wants to address. You said, can you just clarify rule number 1?
Rule number 1, section number 2, members shall, nope, that's not 1. Oh, rats. Rule number 1.
Are you referring to the transparency disclosure, Councillor?
Yes.
Okay. There is a form available for that.
Oh, thank you. Great. In the commentary of rule number 3, there is discussion about members of council handling money for nonprofits and so on. And I wonder if you can maybe comment a little bit on that as well.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering as we go through the rules, if it makes sense for other councillors to raise questions on the same rule,
No, sure, we can do that. And
I'm happy to wait till she's done, but I just thought maybe it would.
No, I think it makes sense. We've been allowing others to interject as well. And so we can go through this in more organized fashion. So I will come back to you. So
I had a comment on rule 1.
Yep. So I'll come back to you, and then Councillor McLeod, finish your question on that you've started, and then I'll go back to Councillor Hamlin on rule 1, and I'll open up on the floor for comments on rule 1.
Great. So there is commentary under rule number 3, which I believe is on page 24. No, this is still around gifts. Sorry. Members' roles in charitable and community events. And in the commentary, it talks about money and cash should never be accepted, and members should not handle any cash on behalf of any charitable organization, not-for-profit, or community group. Now, I've already received advice from the integrity commissioner regarding my role at the curling club, and I am fine with not taking part in council votes regarding pecuniary interests of the curling club since they operate out of a town building. But would I not be able to tend bar on Wednesday like I'm supposed to, like, because there's cash involved and they're a nonprofit corporation? How would one expect this to work?
Mr. Abrams?
Certainly. So the rule speaks to your ethical behavior as a member of council, recognizing that the members of council in many places aren't full-time, but they have other endeavors. And so long as they can conduct themselves, so that's not the way to put it, if in their day job, they are performing their duties of the day job and not as a member of council, then the code of conduct doesn't really engage. One small proviso, and that is you're well known in the community. There's a notion that the code of conduct applies 24/7. You're always a counselor, that sort of thing. So just because you're wearing your work uniform doesn't mean that the code might not apply to you if indeed you're dipping a toe into the realm of council business. Your job is to fill potholes for a private company, and you're on the street and you're yelling at somebody, "Hey, I'm a member of council and I'm gonna make sure you can never back out of your driveway." Well, then you would be engaging the code of conduct, and we would have around. But it's not meant to interfere with your livelihood, your endeavors in a private capacity. There are circumstances. Our discussion on avoidance of conflict of interest, where the outcome will be that because you're a member of another organization, this is what the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act says, because you're a member of another organization, it means that whenever that organization has an interest before council, That act says you can't participate in it, right? So it doesn't say that you can't, as a member of that organization, do X, Y, and Z, as long as it doesn't conflict with your council duties. Hope
Okay.
that was clear.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to Rule 1, and Councillor Hamlin had a question on Rule 1. We'll open up the floor for Rule 1, and then we'll come back to you, Councillor McLeod. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Mr. Mayor, while we're on Rule 3, perhaps I'll just ask about that because.
Okay, you know what? Councillor, let's just go back to Rule 1. We'll open the floor, and then we'll come back to Rule 3.
Oh, all right, no problem. So my first question is on Rule 1, the last commentary on page 18. Let me just go back to it. I'm just wondering what that means. It says members may not participate in activities that grant or appear to grant any special consideration, treatment, or advantage to a family member or an individual, which is not available to every other individual. So I wasn't sure, like, what are activities? Are these town activities? And what does individual mean? It's not a family member. I just want you'll see my questions are all around, like, what am I allowed to do? Because I'm active in the community. Okay, so I want to know here, what activities can't I participate in?
Mr. Abrams.
So again, backing up a bit, our view is that the code is a guide and it's part of the scheme, and that scheme involves opportunities for you to seek advice and to protect yourself, to bulletproof yourself. It's not a trap to find to prevent you from engaging in appropriate activities. But this comment says essentially that as a member of council, you shouldn't be exercising your influence to favor people that are close to you, whether they be family, neighbors, family members, or your best friend who lives next door to you. That's the individual. So you have to treat all of your constituents equally. It's pretty standard provision, the undue use of influence. That's what it's speaking to. It illustrates that rule, that you shouldn't be carrying yourselves in such a way that it appears that you're favoring those people over the rest of your constituents.
So I'll just leave this as a thought, and maybe this is whether we could tighten that up a bit, so that, because I could be, a council member could be participating in some small nonprofit activity in the community of many kinds. If there's not even many people there, and they ask their friend if they want to speak, opening remarks or closing remarks or whatever, it would, I think I would like to see this tailored to somehow to your activities as a counselor, as opposed to participating in the community. Because I understand what you're saying, Mr. Abrams. And I hear also that this is a guide, not a hammer and all that, but people do retain lawyers and get involved, and I just don't want anyone to be involved in problems they don't need.
I think,
Yeah,
if I could speak for staff, Mr. Mayor, I don't think anyone would have any objection to take a relook at the commentary. We certainly don't. And in order to tighten it up, fair request. But I wouldn't want to minimize the statement that this is essentially a guide. It's a policy document. We could take every single paragraph from the code and add language and conditions and subparagraphs in order to meet the objective. And I hope it doesn't sound like I'm criticizing the question or you in offering it. But as a matter of principle, there is no perfect code. There's no, this one included. And so it really is important to look at the document, not only as text on a page, but as part of a scheme. And so if the concern is that somebody might, in de minimis circumstances, suggest that when you ask somebody to speak at an event, that could somehow, follow the dotted lines, result in a code of conduct complaint against you, well, I'd have trouble of seeing those events falling into place that would actually result in us even taking the complaint, right? It's not the sort of thing this is meant to address. On the other hand, if you are encouraging the hiring of all your children's friends to be lifeguards in the summertime. Okay, now there's something there, right? That's the use, that may well be the undue use of influence. So I repeat, I don't think there's anything wrong with tightening that, looking at it again, but as a matter of general interpretation, I'd ask council to just remember that this is really a policy document.
Okay,
Thank you for that. I wonder if I could just add a follow-up to that. Perhaps you could explain the difference between the actual rules and the commentary.
Well, it's the source of that design came from, I'm a lawyer, Janice is a lawyer, and I should have apologized at the outset. Janice couldn't be here today. We have another matter before another council this afternoon. Janice and I are both lawyers, and when we drafted the code that was the precursor to this, we were both employed in a municipality. I remember typing the darn thing. We thought, well, wait a second. The rules of professional conduct for lawyers contain a relatively discrete number of rules. And what do lawyers do for themselves? They provide some interpretation. There's commentary in that document. So the rules are the rules. The commentaries provide guidance. You wouldn't be able, a complaint couldn't be sustained on just the commentary. That said, the rule itself could be interpreted with the aid of the commentary. So they're meant to expand upon your understanding of of how the rule might be applied, or to provide an example of how the rule might be applied. They're meaningful, they're important, but they don't replace the rules. The real emphasis should be on the rule itself.
Thank you. Councillor Hamlin, follow up.
Thank you. On page 19, there's a paragraph 11. And it seems to suggest that before a councillor becomes president, secretary, vice president, treasurer, director of any charity, service corporation, or a nonprofit, that they have to get in touch with our integrity commissioner and get a written opinion approving the activity. So do we need to be pre-cleared? Is that what that means? And if we're already, serving in these roles, do we have an obligation then to be filing things? And do we have to update this, or, as time goes on, or what exactly is the intent of this one?
The intent of the rule, sorry, Mr. Mayor, the intent of the rule is to address those circumstances where the usual condition is that the member will be engaging with town staff or the town on a regular basis, on a continual basis. We've seen this come to the fore in circumstances where, in another municipality, where a member of council was the head of a social service organization in the municipality, and in fact, rented space from the municipality in order to carry out this nonprofit's functions. And so there was regular connection between that member of council and staff. And so we assisted in helping that member engage with the municipality, continuing to do his good works as part of the social services organization, but preventing there being undue influence of staff, preventing the non-routine things to be accepted merely because the staff member was dealing with a member of council. It was serving a purpose. It wasn't there in isolation. If there's concern with the language, we can look at it. It's not meant to provide a pre-approval, but it is meant to help address those circumstances where there would be inevitable contact between the member in their role with that organization and the municipality. There's one other circumstance that I think it addresses, and that is where a member is so fully engaged in something else that they cannot diligently carry out their functions as a municipal councillor. I've never seen that applied. And otherwise, I'd have to go back to the source for this particular provision to find other examples.
follow up, Councillor Hamlin?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that answer. And if those words could be tailored to what you've discussed, with respect to if there's expected continual interaction with staff, then or whatever, it would save a lot probably, because I know many of us are serving on nonprofits, and that would be a big job for you. Also, I was a bit concerned about the commentary under Rule 1, insofar as it seemed to me that what it was suggesting is that if a member was participating in a nonprofit who would be seeking something from council at some point, that they should not serve on that nonprofit. And the reason that gave me a concern is I thought the rule was you can participate and it's actually encouraged, but if there's a conflict, you don't vote unless you fall into one of the exemptions. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clarified.
Sure.
That's certainly not the intent of the provision. And if you can point me to the commentary either now or later, I'd be happy to look at it.
Okay, I won't take up the time of council to do that. I'd be happy to do it later. So those are my comments on Rule 1, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I saw Councillor Doherty put up her card. Does this relate to Rule 1, Councillor?
No, actually, it's in regard to item 11 that Councillor Hamlin was just discussing, because initially I had the same questions in regard to this item, and that is holding office or directorship on a board or organization. But looking further into the commentary, what I saw, which gave me some level of comfort, and because I also am involved on other organizations in the community, is that there are exemptions, and those exemptions include hospital boards, charitable boards, police services, AMO, and then service clubs such as Rotary Club, Lions Club, and other not-for-profit organizations. So I took from that, if the involvement is in an organization like that, you would be exempted, except of course, and this is, in my view, quite obvious that if there is a matter that would come before council regarding that organization where money or support from the town would be a specific request, that the member at that time would, of course, step away from that discussion. Sorry, that's not really a question. I guess it's just to say that I found satisfaction in the commentary attached to that particular item.
Okay, thank you for that comment. And it does relate to Rule 1. That's just part of the subsections of under Rule 1.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So thank you for that. Council, are there any other questions dealing with Rule 1? No, then I'm going to go back to Councillor McLeod, who was at Rule 3, I think, when we left off there. And then I will go around the floor to see if anyone else has concerns about Rule 3.
Rule 2.
No, I think we're on Rule 3. If somebody raises Rule 2, we'll come back to Rule 2, but I think we were at Rule 3 with Councillor McLeod. So go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. So I would like to request that the reference to councillors should not handle cash money be removed from that commentary. I don't know what we need to do to make that happen, other than just say what I said.
I think what we might do at this point is just to keep questions going, and we'll come back. So make a list, please, of any amendments, and we'll come back and deal with amendments once we've gone around with questions on the various rules. Does this relate to question 3, Councillor? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
So thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I too had Rule 3, subsection 1A and Rule 3, subsection 1C. And I'm wondering, given Mr. Abrams' explanation that members should not directly or indirectly manage or control any monies, as opposed to just taking it out of the comment. I think we have to address it within the rules, or make the comments and the rules match. Because, you know, part of my employment, I do handle cash all the time for a charitable fundraising. And, you know, we have all the training, or we should have all the training with respect to our code of conduct, but the public are going to have input on this, and they're going to be reading it going forward and judging us by it, or are monitoring our conduct. And if we're not explicitly clear with this, you know, I think it can get a little crazy. So that's with 1A. I think we need to clarify if it's, I think you spoke to it a bit, but if you're doing it within the role of your employment or self-employment, the code will get you somewhere else if you're misappropriating or doing something that's not good as a member of council. And then C is with reference to member organized community events. So I volunteer and I go to Bowls for Beds and participate, or I help run Out of the Cold for Home Horizon. I have to bring a list of every sponsor and donor. I mean, that's a significant list for me to participate in that event. So I want to have a better understanding of that and how we can clarify it, so anyone from the public reading that can understand what my obligation is there.
Mr. Abrams?
Thank you. So let me speak to the purpose of the rule first of all, and it's not meant to bring into the municipal realm your activities outside your role of member of council. So let's say that you are in your role of council, as councillor, you're I don't know if this occurs. I mean, you're organizing a soccer game in a park for charitable purposes, and there's going to be some refreshments, and you're seeking some contributions to the event so that you can pay for balloons and a sign. That's really what I'm talking about. Assuming you're not dealing with somebody who's got an application before council, which the rule also takes care of, you ought not to be taking the money from the bank, the corner bank, and paying it to the vendor of ice cream and hot dogs. That is not your role as a member of council, in our view. Connecting the two, making a solicitation for a minor event such as that happens an awful lot in the municipal world. But members, and this happens across the province, members get themselves in trouble when they're actually handling the cash. So for those events, a structure in the municipality where it's held by staff, or if it's an outside event where it's held by non-elected officials, somebody with responsibility to be the treasurer for that organization, that's what we're suggesting ought not be the proper way to support events in the community. It boils down to you yourselves, in your role as member of council, should not be handling cash, because that leads to problems. You want to avoid problems. You want to support the perception that council is operating with integrity in all of its endeavors. And one of the weaknesses in a system is where elected officials take donations in cash. So that's what the purpose of the rule is meant to deal with. You know, we can look at the language again with that in mind, making sure that that is adequately conveyed, but that's the purpose of the rule. So I'd suggest that you not delete the obligation to not hold cash, receive cash in your role as a member of council, but that the rule be clarified in order to make sure that protection exists, but it doesn't interfere with your ability to work, to serve in other capacity.
And follow up, Mayor Saunderson? So I guess the other thought, a part of my training has always been that once you're a member of council, you never get to separate yourself. Even when you're making comment or opinion, you don't get to say in my personal opinion, because you're a member of council and people know it. So you're always being judged by that other level that you are a member of council. So how do you separate out in this when you look at the wording, that no matter what you participate in charitable work, whether you've been involved in it for over a decade or for decades, or whether you just decided yesterday, at the end of the day, you never get to separate and say, you're always doing it as a member of council. So you'll always be under this code of conduct, as far as I can tell.
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, there is a notion that your job is 24/7. It doesn't deny you the opportunity to earn a living. So for one example is if you were in a structured charitable environment, you're the head of a charity and you are collecting funds for that charity, this code would not say you can't do that. But it is a real issue, and you, I think, ought to be discouraged from handling cash in circumstances where it might be perceived that you are doing that in your capacity as a member of council. Now, remember, in those circumstances, which might be a little complicated, you have the ability to come to us and say, look, here are the circumstances. I want to make sure that I can still do these things, but I want to do them in a way that is ethically proper, that won't violate the code of conduct. And that's what we're there for, to help navigate those paths. That's why this is a guide. And in many circumstances, because every single code of conduct is going to be imperfect in some way, shape, or form, you have access to not only an interpreter, but an interpreter who has the responsibility of investigating complaints. You know, there are those who say that this entire scheme is crazy making because the integrity commissioner is helping you draft the document, they're providing you advice, and they have to do an investigation if a complaint comes forward. It works though. It really works if you take a solutions-oriented, pragmatic, and procedurally fair approach to it and regard it not as an opportunity to hold a member for account, but as an opportunity to demonstrate to the community that all of you and council collectively is operating with integrity, making it work. So I hear you. You will be able to find, okay, here's a situation. There's a situation where it doesn't quite fit with the code of conduct. There's a mechanism to provide advice and to find a way through that. And I hear the questions are good questions. I want to give you the confidence that this is not a document that is meant to prevent you from doing the good works that a member of council ought to be doing. But there are certain things where red flags are raised in handling cash in a context where you could be perceived as taking money as a member of council. That's a red flag, and we ought to tread carefully with respect to that.
Thank you. I see Councillor Jeffrey nodding. So we're taking questions still on Rule 3. Go ahead, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I had highlighted the same two sections of this rule that Councillor Jeffrey's just been referring to. And I listened carefully to Mr. Abrams' response, and respectfully, I disagree because I just feel we're a small community, and it's not like any of us are going to be accepting, you know, $25,000 and $1,000 bills for a new computer system in the underground garage of City Hall in Toronto. We're talking in, I think, the example Councillor McLeod just gave. You know, she's going to appear and volunteer at the curling club and is going to be behind the bar, and it's going to be cash. So does she say, sorry, I'm not allowed to, you know, volunteer at this, I'm going to say, small event? And the other part of it being, members shall not directly or indirectly manage or control any monies received relating to community or charitable organizations fundraising. So that's not cash. It doesn't say cash, and it doesn't say members in their capacity as a member of council. So I have to say, at Councillor Jeffrey, who I know is a treasurer of a nonprofit in town that does fundraising nonstop or would have to close. And I'd read that and I'd say, sorry, Councillor Jeffrey, you have to resign. You can't be a treasurer. Or I look at myself and I'm a signing authority for a nonprofit. okay, nobody ever can find me, so it's good. I don't have to do much, but still, does that mean I can't be a signing authority for my nonprofit? Because yeah, they've done some fundraising. They're going to be depositing some money and paying money out from it. And I just worry it's a bit too broad for what we're involved in. And with respect to C, member organized community events. So does that mean the members of a nonprofit or a charity that are, organizing these community events? And as Councillor Jeffrey said, if they're raising money and we attend, we have to give the names of all donors and the value of their donations. Well, that's not even that's got to be against privacy rules somewhere. I hear what you're saying about, it's very bad if we touch money and we have to be held to the highest standard. But I just feel that this goes further than maybe I'd be comfortable with.
Mr. Abrams?
Yes, I think I'm repeating myself, but the rule is not meant to constrain you from participating behind the bar at at your club and serving drinks. And it's meant to deal with those circumstances where you as a member of council are central to establishing the charitable event. You're making those arrangements. You're connecting donors and contributors and suppliers together. That's what it's meant to deal with. And the advice is simply, not that you can't be the coordinator of the event, but don't handle the cash. And I hear you. There's some concern that it might be overly stated or not precisely stated. We can take it away and refine it to serve those interests. But I do want to make sure that the intent, the purpose of the rule is clear, because it wasn't invented out of whole cloth. It is, and much of this language, in fact, has come from another municipality. We borrowed the language into this code of conduct. There are real examples out there where members of council have gotten themselves into trouble doing these things. And we want to avoid our clients' members from getting into trouble, because it undermines the overall perception that the council is operating with integrity. So happy to look at it and tightened up. It's a great conversation, but it's nevertheless an important rule.
Mr. Abrams, I'm wondering, as a follow-up, in our commentary, would it be possible to put in there a statement about the intent of this rule is to, and then put in the intent to give context to the entire commentary and the rule? It just seems to me perhaps that might help to align the intent with what's in the rule itself.
That is the first place I would go when clarification is requested. I'll certainly look at the text of the rule.
Yeah.
Now, I know this is a document that's really in the hands of staff. I'm happy to assist to whatever degree is necessary or appropriate. I'm volunteering some amendments, and I think that staff may want to have a look at it as well. But yes, absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Clarification through commentary is an excellent opportunity.
Thank you. Councillor, are there any more comments on Rule 3? I'm mindful that there are 18 rules, so we will try to deal with as much as we can, but we may run out of time because we do have a corporate and community services meeting today at 5. So with that said, Councillor MacLeod, you had the conch last. Are there other rules that you wanted to raise issues with? You're just on mute. Yeah.
There are actually, but I'm happy to go in order. And I know we just did 1 and 3, and I know that Councillor Hamlin had concerns or questions about Rule 2. I have none on Rule 2.
Okay, well then we'll go back then. Are there any questions or comments about Rule 2? All right, Councillor Hamlin, go ahead, please.
So many things I'm trying to look at here. Just give me 1 second to find it again. So it was on page 25. Well, I had two questions on the gifts. One is there was, I don't know if it was a commentary, it may have been, but it said that it was helpful to consult with the Integrity Commissioner when the member chooses to decline a gift. And I was just wondering what the intent of that was. And secondly, that was on page 24. And then on page 25, I had noted that it said that if we accepted an invitation to attend a charitable golf tournament or a fundraising gala, that was fine as long as we weren't consistently attending. And I wondered where, let's face it, these kind of things, a charity golf tournament or a fundraising gala, they're annual. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood fully what our obligations would be in those two circumstances.
Mr. Abrams?
Certainly, last question first. The way the provision is administered is, it looks at the value of the gift from the same source, the actual value or cumulative value from the same source in a calendar year. So it would be okay to accept the invitation in a subsequent year, as long as it met the dollar constraints in the document. If that answers your second question. The first question, I'm sorry, what you said it referred to refusal of a gift, and I must admit I don't recall where that is.
It's on page 24. It's the second last paragraph. The last sentence, it may be helpful to consult with the Integrity Commissioner when a member chooses to decline a gift, as well as when a recipient may opt to keep a gift. And I'm just wondering, what are the circumstances when we should be consulting if we're declining a gift? Or
well, yeah, the whole paragraph speaks to your required diligence when there's a social function that's close to somebody having a matter before council. And so it's not discreetly that you should seek out the Integrity Commissioner's advice if you decline a gift. The whole commentary is intended to say, look, if you're accepting a gift from somebody who's about to appear before council, you ought to be careful about that, and if necessary, seek the advice of the Integrity Commissioner.
Follow-up, Councillor?
no, thank you.
Okay, is there anyone else who has questions about Rule 2? Seeing none, Rule 4. Are there any questions or comments about Rule 4, Council? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor McLeod? You're on mute, Councillor.
So my question regarding this is under Section 5 of Rule 4. It talks about confidential information and council members seeking confidential information. And I'm just wondering whether this provision, Rule 4, Section 5, prohibits members of council from doing FOIs.
Mr. Abrams?
No, that's not and I think I need the assistance of staff on this one. This may have been a direct importation from a recommendation.
Sarah?
Correct, Your Worship, through the councillor's question, that this would not, any member of the public is able, including members of council, to request an FOI.
Thank you. That's my only question on Rule 4.
Okay, and I guess the follow-up though, do we give out confidential information through an FOI?
Through you, to yourself, Your Worship, we provide information that's not readily available to the public. You know, having to review the document and redact whatever information needs to be redacted in accordance with the Act is what's provided. It's generally not, sensitive, completely sensitive information, but it is information that's not readily available to the public.
Okay, thank
To
you.
assist you, Mr. Mayor, it's certainly been the case. I know that when I was a clerk, I was confronted with this, and that where a member of council would say, look, I'm a member of this organization and I'm entitled to whatever information it holds. And the answer is, well, no, you actually have the same right of access as a member of the public, and a member of the public can file an FOI and it will be processed through the usual channels. And if it's not able to be released, it won't be released to the member of council either.
Thank you. Rule 6. Councillor Hamlin, you have a card. Does this relate to Rule 5?
4.
4. Am I getting ahead of
I
myself?
have a general question, and that is about when we do in-camera training sessions. What part of that is confidential? And I'm not relating to anything in specific other than everything I'm giving you are things I've run into. Okay, so when we did our initial training, we had all kinds of sessions as new counselors. And I remember mentioning to some residents that we had training on A, B, and C, and they were shocked to find out, but were really happy that counselors had training. So then I thought that, so always it's been in my mind, like, are we not supposed to say we had this training, or if we had, are there rules around what we can disclose about that? And do we need to say anything in here about that?
It's interesting. That's come up before. So you're referring to education and training under section 239 3.1 of the Municipal Act, which is a special category of closed session meetings. There's a slate of things under which council can go into and discuss in the absence of the public. 3.1 says that council can resolve into closed session to take education and training. The rule does say, though, that the record of the meeting is available. It's public. In other words, so if there's an agenda for the meeting, there's a slide deck for the meeting, unless, of course, there might be other legitimate reasons for keeping it confidential, other heads that would permit the municipality for keeping it confidential. Generally speaking, the slide deck itself would be part of the record and therefore open to an access request or request that it be provided. So the reason for the training, though, being closed session is that it is a much better way to train. So you're not in the chamber, at least this is the training we do. You're not in the chamber, the mayor or the committee chair is not running the meeting, the facilitator. We are. It's like a classroom. And you can raise questions and push back and say, what about this? What about that? And as long as the business of the municipality is being advanced, you can use real issues to understand the subject of the training. So that's a good answer for members of the public to say, well, why can't I be trained that way? Well, the reality is that training in public is much less effective. It's just not the quality is higher when you can do it in a classroom. But the act itself says, well, it's not super secret because the record is available to be shown.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Clerk Almas.
Certainly, Your Worship. There's been a lot of positive, passionate discussion about this item. I'm wondering if it would be beneficial, as we indicated, we were hoping to bring a report back later this month, knowing that there was a lot more questions to the document as provided. Would it be appropriate to approve the staff report, the recommendation not be endorsed, the code of conduct, receive it at this point? We can start the public consultation together with receiving council feedback regarding the items of concern that they have.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We're moving through this and we've only got 45 minutes before the the Corporate Community Services. So we are running up to time constraints and we have some significant reports to do. I will take a comment from Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Hamlin. Go ahead, Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mr. Saunderson. I only have comments with Rule 5 and Rule 8. Other than that, I have no other comments on the rules. So I don't know if people can limit how many they have, but I really don't want the public weighing in on something that I haven't vetted and doesn't represent maybe my view or council's view before it gets out there. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Hamlin, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, I have a few more questions. And I do find it useful to have, councillors participating in this discussion, because it is useful to hear what their concerns are and so on. I'm not saying it has to be done at this meeting, but I do find that helpful if it could be, even in an hour and a half, or could be scheduled again at some point. Thank you.
Yes, we've done 4 rules now in an hour. So with 18, it could take a much longer time. Councillor Berman, you had your hand up there for a sec.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just to the one thing that Councillor Hamlin was addressing. So as an example with the in-camera training, is this now I guess through you to the clerk, is this now something that's a public document, or is this proprietary?
That's okay, Clerk Almas.
Certainly, some of the documents are definitely proprietary, for in-camera training purposes. So we'd have to, take a look at that. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that all the slide decks or information provided in camera are public documents. We'd have to take a look at them individually.
Okay, thank you. So this is what I'm going to recommend, Council, that comments and questions about various concerns throughout the rules be sent to the clerk, and that we will organize a follow-up meeting in order to address those concerns in public, so that there will be full options. But given the time constraints, I think it would be useful to, for today's purposes, receive the report and get the public consultation process going, unless we can organize this follow-up meeting in the next 2 weeks. I don't want us to run out of runway here. So I'll look to the clerk in terms of a follow-up SIC meeting. Is that something that we can do in the next 2 weeks, Sarah?
Thank you, Worship. Certainly, we could schedule a special SIC meeting, knowing that the end of the month too, we'll also be having another special SIC meeting for budget, the commencement of our budget deliberations as well. But if members of council can accommodate 2 additional SIC meetings this month, we can schedule it.
Okay. And then what I would suggest is that we aim to have all the follow-up questions on commentary and rules submitted to the clerk within a week of today's date. So close of business next Monday, if we can. And then we will schedule a follow-up SIC meeting to address those concerns. So we did have, yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
So just for clarification, if there is a motion to defer the remainder of this discussion to a special SIC, we will not undertake any public consultation until the conclusion of that SIC meeting.
Yes. Okay. But if we could, I guess, schedule that in the interim in any event, just so we're ready to go. So then I will look for a motion to defer the balance of these discussions. So that's Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey. And I will call the vote then. All in favor? Thank you. That's carried unanimously. So then the motion that was on the floor was that staff report C 2021-17 titled 2021 Collingwood Code of Conduct for members of council, committees and local boards, and Collingwood Code of Conduct for the advisory committees and task force be received. And then so what I'm going to do is sever that. We've deferred the balance and we will just vote on receiving it for today. Oh, and I think I had a mover and a seconder for that at the outset. I'm going to check with the clerk, but I think we did before we put it on the floor. So that being said, I'm going to call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much. And thank you to staff and Jeff Abrams for being here today. And we'll look forward to continuing this discussion. Clerk Almas. Yep.
Certainly. Knowing the next item on the agenda is the whistleblower policy, we have a number of attendees and our consultants that would like to speak to the Art Center feasibility. So if we're able to move that one up next.
Okay. We will do that then. So we'll pull item 3 forward on the agenda. And that is PRC 2021-8 Collingwood Arts Center feasibility study report. And I will pass it over to Director Culver to introduce this.
Thank you, Worship. Hopefully you can hear me. There's been a little bit of technical difficulty with Karen Cubitt, so I'm going to introduce Nordicity, but I would like to point out that Karen's been phenomenal acting as point person on this study project and assisting Nordicity with access to what they needed to do a great job. Without further ado, actually, I'll ask that Julie Whalen of Nordicity, Greg McClary of Nordicity, and Stephanie Ma of Gyamo be brought into the meeting. And once they're set and ready, I'll hand it over to them.
I see two of them on our screen. We're waiting for the third. Good morning, Greg, or afternoon, Greg, and good afternoon, Julie. And
Morning.
there is Stephanie. All right, I'm going to pass it over to the three of you.
Wait, I can't, hang on. I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
We can hear you and we can see you.
Oh, why am I looking up here? This is so awkward. Okay, I'm going to put you down here. Not that that's the view you want. Okay, wow, here we are. Thank you so much, everyone, for having us. Thank you, Council and Mayor Saunderson and everyone listening. Thanks also to Karen, Dean, Mel, and Tanya for all your work through this project. This was our first feasibility study amid a global pandemic, and working with you really made every difference. I know we're under tight time, so luckily I speak very quickly. My name is Julie Whelan. I was the project manager for the study alongside a great team at Nordicity and Gyamo, who I'm hoping have joined at this point. Yeah, I can see Stephanie. Nordicity is a global consulting firm in the arts, culture, and heritage sectors, as well as across the creative industries. This project was our first of now 3 collaborations with Gyamo, and I'll pass to Stephanie to introduce herself.
Thanks, Julie. So I'm Stephanie Ma. I'm the creative director at Gyamo. And Gyamo is an architecture firm working across Ontario, integrating design and heritage conservation. We're a team of 11 and specialize in developing contextual and creative architecture solutions that foster environmentally, socially, and culturally sustainable places, and have really enjoyed working with Nordicity and the town of Collingwood and the community on this project. So thanks for having us.
Fantastic. So thank you, Stephanie. Today, our plan is to provide you with a brief overview of our study's findings. This is a snapshot of a much more nutritious report. And so we welcome your questions, but just know we're really only covering a fraction of the total material in this presentation. And we can go to sharing the slides if possible. Fantastic. Oh, wait, wait. So and we can go right to the first slide there, or the second slide. The original scope of work was to look broadly at the feasibility of an arts and culture center with real openness as to the facility's features, scale, location, and so on. In this context, our approach is really rooted in consultation, including an online survey with a phenomenal turnout, wonderful interviews with many leading arts organizations and venues in town. We're so grateful to them for sharing their time and expertise. A lively virtual roundtable with those same leaders and more members of the kind of wider network of community organizations. We further interviewed industry experts to help us gauge external demand factors as we built our business model assumptions. We'd like to thank CACE and Rob Hart in particular for their high degree of interest and enthusiasm in the project, as well as everyone we connected with over the course of the study. And the highlight surely was our tour of Collingwood on a beautiful sunny Friday in July. In any case, very quickly, the lack of adequate professional venues for performance and rehearsal emerged as the leading facility gap for the sector. And so our team was then challenged to determine the form of an art center that would best address or meet this need, align with the town's priorities, and be feasible given everything we learned about Collingwood's strengths, challenges, growth, and the market. We can go to the next slide. To be clear, the vision we're putting forward here and in the report is by no means an official one. It's our interpretation of the consultations and has not been endorsed by the sector. With that said, what we heard is that the center must both celebrate Collingwood's local sector and attract touring performers, appeal and be accessible to Collingwood's year-round population while also attracting the attention of tourists and seasonal residents, build on the successful foundation of the Collingwood Arts District and the vibrant downtown heritage corridor, and operate with a minimum subsidy while also being accessible to artists and all audiences. So as you can see, this is a center that really wants to accomplish a lot. Go to the next slide. This second slide shows some of the commitments the center would have to embrace, I think, for the public to be on board. And here and through the report, you will see the consistent need to strike a balance between programming and supporting the local sector and drawing in touring artists. Later, Stephanie will touch on some of the features of the center, but a critical question kind of remains, what size or scale would be the optimal fit for a performing arts center in Collingwood? So we can go to the next slide. And what we're presenting here as two scenarios really is a spectrum that ranges from kind of at least 400 seats at one end to 800 plus seats. There ought to be a plus sign there. We try not to get too focused on any single figure here, but think more about how these figures help us understand what the experience of using the center might be given current assumptions. So those assumptions include things like how many nights per year the venue can be rented, a realistic ramp up time until the venue hits a certain stride, for example. We know for sure, though, that the center would have to be required to make space available at below market rates to a variety of local users to achieve that mandate of being truly accessible to the community. In scenario one, or what we call scenario one, seating capacity is at least 400 seats. Construction costs range from 16 to 25 million. And the programming mix is ideally weighted 70% towards kind of community-driven bookings at rates that are geared, to be more affordable, and 30% tour-based, that is bringing in artists from outside the region to perform live in Collingwood. So a local organization could expect to spend, say, $13.50 per night to rent the venue, while a touring organization would be charged more than double that fee. And this fee includes assumptions around labor costs like security, janitorial services, box office, all of that. And now we know that fee certainly would represent a bit of a jump from today for many organizations, and we'll talk more about that leap in a moment. In scenario two, or at the other end of our range, seating capacity is minimum 800, square footage and construction costs have doubled. The programming split is now assumed to be more 50-50 between community-driven and outside artists. Local organizations are paying around $2,000 a night for the venue in this scenario. So again, we know these fees would be a stretch for many organizations right now, and there's work that would need to be done to show, what are they getting for that increase? What does access to this accessible, new space, greater seating capacity, and overall experience, what would that mean for what they could do with maybe their ticket prices, their marketing activities, maybe potential partnerships, other ambitions, and so on. So we would really suggest using the pre-building phase to support the local sector to factor in some of these some of this thinking into their strategic planning. That being said, still some kind of local artists, less established artists may find the venue would just be still too large for their needs, even with clever curtaining or other things you can do to sort of create that intimate vibe. And that's why there still really remains the need for a smaller stage to be the local black box or incubator space for emerging and experimental work. And that stage could be added to the larger facility or be found amongst Collingwood's existing venues. As well, at 800 plus seats, the venue would still need to work to appeal to more established artists. So that could mean, connecting to larger festivals, maybe major sponsors, VIP programming, all to get on the radar of kind of touring schedules. In any case, as mentioned, these top line figures are based on a host of assumptions, and small adjustments to the model, as Greg will talk about, can have big impacts. So part of the process looking ahead would be further refining and testing our assumptions. And I'll hand to Stephanie to talk a bit more about size, scale, and location.
Thanks, Julie. So as Julie mentioned, two key options for the size and scale of the new facility emerged: medium scale, that 400 to 600 range, or a large scale, 800 plus range, both with varying programming identified as per the desired features, which include things like the performance space and theater, of course, but also space for education and collaboration, like studios and classrooms, and flexible public gathering areas with a cafe or a bar, and more further outlined in the report. The approximate square footage for these options has been determined based on precedent studies of similar centers, building code requirements, and standard space requirements. Next slide, please. So from this, we went into a location analysis. The report recommends that the downtown and waterfront area of Collingwood is most suitable. This location map, which I know is teeny tiny on the screen, but is available in the report as well, showcases the various considerations that have led to this recommendation. In particular, a cluster of cultural amenities located within or near the downtown heritage conservation district, as well as the projected growth and development outlined in the Collingwood waterfront master plan, indicate an opportunity for an arts district within the downtown waterfront area that could serve both local community needs and visitors. So once this area was determined, a number of sites were considered and further assessed for their feasibility to support the recommendations in the report. And while not all sites considered and assessed were deemed suitable, there are a number of sites that meet the needs of the study on a preliminary high level. These include Eddie Bush Arena, Leisure Time Club, a small portion of Millennium Park beside the grain terminal, and multiple downtown parking lots. These are recommended as potential sites. The next step would be looking into each for further consideration, which will be essential in ensuring that no existing programming or services at these sites are displaced without a strategy if selected. There is also potential for various building types for the identified sites as well. Could be adaptive reuse, renovation, new construction, or a hybrid approach, each with various benefits depending on the final site selected. So design guidelines were developed that can be applied to the facility regardless of the building type pursued or the size option selected, to ensure that the facility design integrates into the existing community and character and supports the cultural value of downtown, while also allowing for the development of an adaptable, inclusive, sustainable, and state-of-the-art performance facility. I think over to Greg now.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So on this slide, we show sort of the bottom line results of our business modeling exercise. In terms of performing this analysis, we had to look at something a little bit more specific than a 400 to 600 seat range. So what you're looking at is a scenario 1 that's specifically about 400 seats and a scenario 2 that's about an 800 seat facility. As Julie noted previously, the build cost, price points of rentals, and our assumptions about programming that would fill the facility are quite different in each scenario. But what you can see here is that the pure operating deficit that you would see for each scale of facility would be quite similar. And the reason you see a similar trajectory and magnitude of operating deficit for each option has largely to do with the 800 seat option being more commercially attractive to promoters that can pay a larger rental fee. In this case, what you're seeing here is purely the operating income. So it does not include, this is the deficit that would have to be made up by a subsidy from the municipality. And just to generalize, we're assuming that both scenarios would require a $250,000 a year subsidy based on the assumptions we made about rental rates in the building. And just before we let things move on, one thing to note is that these results do not include the cost of financing. So in the case of scenario 2, where you've got significantly higher construction costs, it may be necessary to bring on more debt to actually finance the construction of the facility. And that would imply that there are additional costs associated with servicing interest and repayment of principal on the loan. And I think this goes back to Julie.
Thanks, Greg. Next slide, perfect. So here we just have some of the key success factors that emerge from those consultations, and these really would be true at any size. First, we know recognize there'll be a lot of pressure on the first kind of director to forge meaningful connections with the local sector and the community, to really get to know the surrounding region's art scenes, art centers, and to have really incredible marketing skills. Next, a great experience for the artists coming to Collingwood. This venue, and of course from Collingwood, but this venue will be in a highly competitive tertiary market, and increasingly the artist's personal experience when in town is becoming a differentiator among kind of competing municipalities. So how can Collingwood market the experience of performing here as part of the venue's unique selling point? Are you promising kind of the best crowds, the best scene, the best backstage, the best management? To take the next two together, as we mentioned, how can local organizations in dance, theater, music, performance be prepared to incorporate this venue into their future planning and avoid kind of that sticker shock in terms of a higher facility rental cost? But as well, how can it become part of a career path or milestone for artists in the broader region? and across Southern Ontario. One interviewee talked about a successful program called the Road to Massey Hall, where people or artists sort of gigged at increasingly larger venues on their way to Massey Hall. And could there be a road to Collingwood of sorts? And of course, the venue needs to be the absolute pride of the town in all facets, from its design and acoustics to its approaches to programming and inclusion. And final slide, we leave you with some really high-level next steps, including working with the model and our assumptions to find that optimal seating range and other optimizations. We recommend reconvening the local arts and culture sector stakeholders to gauge their reactions and gain buy-in for the findings. Connect as well with surrounding municipalities, industry associations, funders, and fundraisers to look at possible partnerships, impacts, other strategies, advance those pre-building initiatives, including connecting with producers and tour managers, kind of thinking more along the lines of that program calendar, what it might look like. Finally, advancing site selection, whether through an RFP or internally, and talk through optimal governance approaches that align with the stated priorities for this art center. And with that, I'd invite my team to join, and we'll happily kind of open the floor to questions. Thank you so much for having us. And I know that was a lot of information conveyed very quickly, but happy to stick around. Oh, and I can see there are already some Q&As.
Thank you very much, three of you, for that excellent presentation. And we have all read your report with great interest. And I'm going to look to Clerk Almas to see if there's anyone from our audience that would like to speak to this item.
Certainly, thank you, Your Worship. Again, any of the attendees wishing to address this presentation and report, please press the raise your hand feature or press *9 if you're using a telephone. Thank you, Your Worship. We do have Mr. Tom Vincent wishing to speak to the Standing Committee.
All right, please patch Mr. Vincent through.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you. If you're content with that, go ahead, Tom.
Well, I don't know anybody wants to look at me, but anyhow, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I just wanted to mention one thing about the financing, because I know that there are some scary numbers there that have been presented to council, and could probably drive you to drink very quickly. From our perspective and the research that we've done from CACE, our information based on the grants that we think that we can get from the feds and the province would be that we would end up basically subsidizing the total construction of this type of facility. So that if we looked at something at $45 million as an example, we would approach the feds for 15, the province for 15, and then 15 from the municipality. But we believe we could raise at least $10 million out there, so that we would be looking from the municipality to be supporting it to the tune of in and around $5 million. And we're just talking in a very broad perspective. But you know, according to that, the last slide there, that Greg had mentioned, obviously, about the financing costs built into the annual operating deficit, we believe that we can raise the funds, you know, through the various sources that I've just mentioned, to be able to make this sustainable from the perspective of building a property, building a center for the town, and not have to worry about financing in regard to the actual physical facility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent. Sarah, do we have anyone else? You're just on mute there. Go ahead.
At this point, Your Worship, there's no further individuals wishing to speak to this report.
All right, well then I'll read in the recommendation and we'll get it on the floor, and I'll take questions and comments from council. The recommendation reads that staff report PRC 2021-8 Collingwood Arts Centre feasibility study report be received, and the council receives the Collingwood Arts Centre feasibility study final report by Nordicity Group Limited, and the council directs staff to proceed with the recommended next steps in accordance with the approved work plans and budget. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Doherty and Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Berman, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. I was going to ask if we could just sever the two recommendations till I get an explanation on one thing.
So we got 3 recommendations. So you want to sever the last paragraph? Which paragraph do you want to sever? It's different in the agenda than the report. Sorry, Councillor.
Okay, so happy to receive it and just wanted to question what was entailed in directing staff at this point.
Certainly. So we can sever that, and I will direct that question to Director Culver to be answered by whoever deems appropriate.
Through your worship, actually, I'm sorry. The question, my headphone kind of jumped on me, so I didn't catch the question, unfortunately.
Sure. Councillor Berman, can you repeat your question, please?
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Yeah, just some clarification, because the wording is to get staff to proceed, and then I'm just a little confused under the analysis where the part that talks about staff returning in late 2022 or early 2023, and I may not be sitting here, so I'm just not sure what it is. Maybe what dollars or staff hours you're looking for between now and that time.
Thank you, Councillor Berman, and through your worship. So as Julie kind of alluded to, there's work to be done, and we still need to kind of assess some things out. And as Rob mentioned in his presentation, and as Tom alluded to as well, there's a lot of conversations that we need to have about what is the final destination here. We prognosticated, end of 22, early 23 on the basis of the time we estimated it might take to, get full understanding of funding opportunities, get a full understanding of what the final destination looks like, understand the strategies of how this building will sit on whatever piece of property is chosen. We assessed a lot of work to be done between here and there. So that was sort of our best guess in terms of when we might return to council. Certainly that can be accelerated, but we try to not overpromise. We're trying to learn from our past mistakes on this. But yeah, no, there's a lot of work, and that was sort of our best guess as to sort of when we might be returning to council. I know that CACE would be extremely interested in seeing that work happen more expeditiously. We'll do the best we can, obviously. Julie, I don't know if there's another part of that answer that you'd like to speak to or could speak to.
No, that's right. That sounds good.
Thanks, Dean. Any follow-up, Councillor Berman?
I don't think so. I think what you're telling me, Dean, please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's really staff time over the next several months. Do you anticipate a 2022 budget ask for this?
Dean?
So through your worship, yes, in a kind of a broad way. I don't actually know what that budget ask would be at this point, because we have to narrow down things like which site, what funding opportunities are available, what philanthropy looks like. These are all questions and dialogues that we need to have to kind of complete the exercise of feasibility. Certainly, Nordici has taken us a lot farther than I think we thought we might get, and I'm really appreciative of the work they've done. But I think we were all on the same page that there's a lot of work left to do in order to sharpen the point of the spear and make sure that we're delivering what the community wants with maximum benefit and effect and long-term sustainability. So that's really where our mindset is about making sure that we provide the amenity and facility that the public asks for through this study.
Okay, through you, Mayor Saunderson, then I don't see a need to sever this. Then that's answered my question.
Okay, thank you, and compliment Director Culver on working in Broadway to that answer. I've got Deputy Mayor Hall, then Councillor Jeffrey, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I guess I just would like to comment on the fact that I'd like to support today receiving and moving this report forward to council in 2 weeks' time. And within that time frame, I am going to perhaps take some further time to digest the report that was given to us last week in advance, which I greatly appreciate, as well as maybe just give it a broader sort of overview from a very macro perspective, because not only is this a tremendous opportunity for the community from a an arts and cultural perspective. The economic engine has already been spoken to, but there are a lot of parts within our downtown, and we have an incredible downtown to cherish and preserve. And I've mentioned at the council table, the long-term vision of our downtown in terms of the physical footprint isn't growing, but there are challenges, parking being one of them. And how can we take the existing assets that we've got within our downtown to further maximize them and perhaps to complement and grow such an opportunity such as this. The one thing that I would just share, and I hope that it is taken from the perspective of looking forward to ensuring that this is truly a success, that's something that people for years from now can take great pride in. And that is that as a member of the community for 25 years, and I'm fortunate to have been here for that period of time, but in that period of time, having witnessed time and again opportunities that were either missed or opportunities that started perhaps in one direction and ended in another. I would be a person that is very much in favor of, at the appropriate time and with the appropriate direction, ensuring that this opportunity is placed in the hands of experts and that council, if supportive of moving forward with the concept, and if council moves to make such a recommendation to move forward, that council, quite frankly, gets out of the way. And that we allow the experts within our own staff and the experts who we know live and work and play within our community to really take this opportunity and take it from, we're just past, say, maybe the starting line today and moving it forward to the end line. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson, and a very comprehensive report, and I appreciate it. I don't need the answers today, but going forward, I was just curious as to any geographic breakdown we might have for the 1,600 responses. That's an exceptional response rate, but I would be interested in that breakdown. And in terms of the nightly cost, is there worked into that calculation? I'm assuming it's not based on 100% occupancy year round, that there would be some kind of buffer in there that you're probably not renting it every night of the year. Anyway, those are just for going forward. I don't need anything tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I see heads nodding. So Dean, do you have a quick answer for any of those queries, or Julie?
Thank you.
The question about occupancy.
Yeah, I was just going to say there is actually in the report a question regarding the breakdown as well, about where the 1,600 or where all of the responses were fielded from regarding local or regional. And then, yes, I think Greg would have an answer regarding the occupancy question.
Okay, go ahead, Greg, please.
Yeah, so when we looked at these, the basis for our occupancy assumptions for the main auditorium were based on our own research of how big events would be for any given community user. And we had revenue streams that were estimated based on the expected fill for those types of events, as well as the overall number of those events that we would expect to see in a given year. And we assumed occupancy for the main auditorium was capped at about 200 rentals per year, 200 days per year. So what you see in year 5 is after it's ramped up to that I think it's 186 actually rentals per year in year 5 of the main auditorium.
Thank you for that. Any follow-up, Councillor? Okay, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's ironic that Deputy Mayor Hall referenced how long he had lived here and how many proposals that he had seen in the past for an all arts center. Because my first remark was going to be, you're not local until you've seen at least 2. and this would be my third in 33 years. So on average, one every 10 years. But this one is different. Starting with the proposed capacity, and I don't claim to be an expert by any stretch, but it had always been said to me that for a town our size, never consider more than 400, that it was absolute suicide, and that you would be entering into all kinds of complications relative to ACTRA requirements and other union requirements and so on. So, you know, among the first few pages, I see a minimum of 400 and then going up to 800 plus. So I'm just wondering what's the new rationale for this proposed or two levels of capacity, I guess.
Okay, thank you. Julie, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. I think that there were really many sort of, oh, sorry, I'm getting a bit of feedback, but sorry about that. There were many sort of in our consultations, the number of different descriptions of the sweet spot of for capacity, you know, 500, 400, 800. And a lot of it has to do with once you're kind of, I think, ready to attract the tours and wade into the you know, the ACTRA requirements, as you say, and the different kind of union and accessibility needs, those performers need a certain size in order to make back their own investment in the they need a certain seating capacity. So it's sort of you know, once you're getting up into that space without a certain number of seats, it's not going to appeal to them. And even at 800, we were trying to say it could be a challenge, which is why it has to kind of compete on more than just a seating capacity. Sorry, I'm still getting this feedback, but. So it is not you know, an easy answer, and it is a big. It feels so in some ways it feels risky the bigger you go, but in other ways there's kind of chances to offset risk with a bit more seating capacity, and you're a bit more of a magnet or a draw. But obviously you're onboarding other risks. So you're absolutely right. It's not. It's a big step.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you. I just had a couple of other questions, if I may. You mentioned that you were impressed by the participation rate in the online survey, and I was at 1,630 some odd. What would you have anticipated for a market this size?
It's a good question. I think we're always happy, I think, in the hundreds. You need a certain threshold. Greg will tell me the number to be able to kind of do any interesting cross tabulations, which we didn't actually try to do too much of here. We kept it pretty simple. But we had been, even in our shortlist meeting, sort of challenged, I think, to come up with you know, a good engagement strategy and outreach, and we're really supported by the town and engaged Collingwood, and Tanya put together this phenomenal list, and people were, you know, sharing it with you know, their emails. Anyway, I won't even go into all the anecdotes, but so this was a standout. I can't pretend that we expect to repeat this in other municipalities. But I think it was because it was an identified challenge from the outset, that it would be a potential hurdle. So that was really helpful for us as a team, I think.
Yeah. Great.
And to Julie's point, it's 384 responses you need to extrapolate to a population.
Okay, well, we like to take an interest in things in this community, that's for sure. There was a couple of you talked about potential partners, and I'm just wondering if you had explored, or if this would be maybe down the road, maybe you know, some kind of a regional facility so that we could pull in other municipalities in South Georgian Bay, as an example, or, you know, our major employer, Blue Mountain Resorts, just up the road, or, you know, the potential to marry it with a convention center concept, or you referenced when speaking of Eddie Bush as a possible location, you talked about the notion, well, we'd have to find a multi-use before we could consider that. Well, what about this being part of a multi-use? So am I jumping ahead? Would these be part of phase 2 or?
Dean, I can see you're off mute. Am I jumping in ahead of you? Or okay. Okay, so no, these are all great questions and things that kind of surfaced in different ways. We did speak informally with Blue Mountain Resorts, who said, this aligns a lot with their vision and their, aspirations for the future. Talking about anything that expands into the shoulder months for them is a real boost and something they like to see off their peak season. We know certainly that Barrie is advancing with their performing arts facility. I think what we heard from the sector, if we're honest, when we thought about convention centers and marrying with the something more multi-use, was the idea that this should be something where the DNA is really arts and culture, and it stands out. It's not trying to achieve all things, but I think that it could still be explored as part of the phase 2. But certainly our feedback was about keeping its DNA, relatively arts and culture, while still being very accessible and inviting, and not trying to say that it's some sort of elevated thing that people won't want to participate with, but just that was one thing that stuck with us.
Follow-up, Councillor?
Yes. Will there be an opportunity to look at the business experience or the business models of some of the other facilities that you reference when you were looking at what facilities exist today around us, and what's working, what isn't working, who's making money, who's hanging on by their teeth. And in particular, I was intrigued by the City of Kingston model, where it seems as though they had spent just a huge amount of money on the facility, and whether that facility was actually, was it economically viable, and not necessarily not necessarily for profit, but just to be sustainable, I guess.
Julie?
For sure. I think as the vision and the site and you're triangulating around those comparables, the ones that really feel like the close fit. We presented at different meetings. We presented so many different kind of whether for more inspiration or more clarity. Are we thinking around this? So if you were to look at, I think, the TET Center and the Isabel Bader beside it, I couldn't speak right now to its kind of success or profitability, but if that became the kind of comparable you wanted to, we could sometimes they're willing to talk quite candidly about some of the challenges and lessons learned over time.
Dean, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think Councillor Doherty's digging into some of what we would see as the nuances of the term feasibility. And she mentioned, is she jumping ahead? And I would say yes, but that's not surprising given that it's a pretty exciting platform to begin with. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I will go to reports like this one that I'm reading right now about different facilities, how they're operating, what their net cost to the communities are, how they're performing in terms of the mix of what they provide to the local arts community versus sort of more touring professional performances. There's a lot of things to be discussed and decided upon before we hit the center of the bullseye. But all of your questions are extremely valid, and that's the work that we're proposing staff to take on over the next year.
Just one final question. The focus in terms of potential location was, at or near downtown. But was there consideration, or will there be consideration to some alternatives. And I'm just throwing this out there, the notion of something that is adjacent or even attached to our Georgian College facility, which is not downtown, but is an existing, educational facility with, potential tie-ins from to create a partnership between an educational facility and an arts for-profit facility.
I'll start with Director Culver and then ask any of the presenters if they want to add anything. Go ahead, Dean, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, Your Worship. I think again, Councillor Doherty, you're moving into the longer term outlook, the idea of challenging what has been determined as feasible through this initial approach, and I think all that work needs to be done, because one of the things we know about Collingwood, the capital T town of Collingwood, is that we don't have a lot of land that we own municipally. So we were looking at spaces that would meet the footprint needs and sort of the access needs. But then also, I believe, and I think I'll ask Julie just to confirm this, that a lot of it was driven by that public response as well in terms of where it should be located. So all of that has to be taken into account as we, work on what are going to be the realities of this facility at the end of the day. So I'll just defer to Julie though for comments about why we ended up with the downtown centric focus.
Sure, I'll let Stephanie weigh in with any thoughts there.
Sure, thanks, Julie. For the location, we did go into this study not having a area or location determined. It was completely open. We looked at all of Collingwood. And the main thing that did drive us to that downtown waterfront area was one, community consultation, a lot of feedback from the community that was interested in that location. But then the other factor that we looked at was the idea of downtown having a arts district. There is already, as you all know, a wonderful arts and culture community in downtown Collingwood, a lot of studios, galleries, theaters, and we saw an opportunity through this, looking at other precedents, to leverage that district and be a part of it, integrate into it. And so something, if you're a part of the community or even a visitor to Collingwood, we saw a benefit in them coming to this new facility and then also being easily exposed to all of the other elements, the studios, theaters, etc., that are already established in the community. And this was part of making sure that the arts community in Collingwood doesn't get sort of overstepped, that they're still leveraged, that they're still have lots of opportunity to showcase what is already there, that we're not replacing anything that's existing. It's just further leveraging and supporting what is already there. And what we saw was a lot of it was downtown in that HCD.
Thank you, Stephanie. Is
Great.
that all your questions, Councillor? Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. I look forward to next steps.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you. As chair of the Corporate and Community Services Committee, I am sorry to interrupt this conversation. However, I need to confer with the clerk about what we're going to do regarding the meeting, which was supposed to start 3 minutes ago on this very forum, and we're only on the second item of this SIC meeting. I'm not looking to curtail this discussion. I am, though, looking for perhaps what ought we do.
Well, thank you, Councillor McLeod. And we did have a discussion prior to the meeting today, understanding we had a very full agenda. So I think what we will do today is wrap up on this item, and then we will adjourn the balance of the items to the next SIC meeting, which will be brought sooner this month, and deal with them in due course there. So there's your answer. And don't worry, Chair, you'll get your chance. All right. Are there any other questions or comments, Council? Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to start by thanking our consultants and our staff. I was overwhelmed by how great this report was. Really, the detail of it. I love the conservative approach to things. I love the emphasis on local and the recognition of our existing artist community, the need for incubator, not only for promoting innovative art, but for promoting our performers who are here, for recognizing the young families that are coming into town and, as well as the older community. And, I recall fondly when I had young kids, how great it was to go to the young people's theater downtown on a Saturday afternoon with little kids and like plunk them down, and they so enjoyed. So I was so glad to see you recognizing, the variety of needs of the community. I also liked that you recognized that Collingwood is a center for this region for arts and culture. Not that there aren't other facilities, but in so many ways, Collingwood provides benefits to a larger region. And I think your report mentioned another 75,000 people. To me, that's really conservative. So anyway, just thank you for all that. I wanted to echo our Deputy Mayor's comments that I would love this to move ahead now. I really feel the time is right. Our community is ready. We have a private sector partner who has, even as I wrote down the numbers here tonight, 10 million he believes can be raised from the community. And the 45 million he was talking about is at the high end of a larger facility. So, and I'm sure they'll be helpful at the provincial and federal levels as well, raising funds. So I would just hate to see this languish for, a couple of election cycles until we have to do another study, as Councillor Doherty pointed out, because it will take years for it to be built, even once the site is discovered. And, we're talking a long-term project. So I'd hate to lose any more time at the beginning. So the idea that we heard from the first deputant tonight was an independent project manager and a working committee now to keep going on this. So my question is maybe to our staff, is this something we can consider in the context of our budget discussions?
So certainly, through your worship, certainly we're not going to turn down any support the council wishes to push towards staff. And I guess at this point, we've received the report. We've gone through the report. We've done some preliminary analysis of the report. We haven't come to a place where I know exactly what a project manager would do. And given that we're sort of right in the threshold of, or right in the thick of developing a budget for 22, we didn't know exactly what we'd be asking for. So we committed to this being a staff exercise. Given that it's a legacy reserve fund, I felt too that we, if the opportunity occurred where we were able to, we required some funding, that we would be able to come to council outside of the budget. Having said that, I don't have that answer today. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right things in the right order, and if we're attracting resources to support this initiative, and certainly we're not trying to slow anything down at all. That's not the goal here. We understand the passion that's been expressed by CACE and by 1,600 respondents and all of that. So it's really just being able to give council a really good recommendation. And at this point, while I'm definitely appreciative of what Rob had suggested and what you're suggesting, I just don't have an answer for you right this minute. But we'll happily take that under advisement and return once we've had some more time to figure out what that might look like.
Thanks, Dean. Follow up, Councillor?
No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Good. Thank you very much. Councillor, any other questions or comments on this item? Before I call the vote, I'd just like to thank our presenters. The Nordicity report is extremely thorough and lots of food for thought in there. And I appreciate staff's dedication to this and the fact that we got this feasibility study. It is a map forward. Having been involved in one of these projects before with the Central Park, I know there's lots of groundwork to be done, lots of business case numbers to be hashed out and financing models. And so I certainly look forward to all of that work being done. And with that, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much to our presenters today and to to you for your report and to all in our audience who are waiting patiently for this item. Clerk Almus.
Certainly, sorry, Your Worship, just for clarification. So the request was to have the motion severed. I just wanted to make sure that that was.
No, I think Councillor Berman withdrew that.
Okay.
So we've dealt with all three items at once. So thank you for the clarification. So with that being said, we're going to adjourn the balance of the, or recess, I guess, the balance of the items today so that we can get to our corporate commercial session, corporate community session. And so I think then I'm just looking for a motion to adjourn procedurally. Is that right, Sarah?
Your Worship, you actually had the sole discretion on calling a recess. So.
Well, then I'm going to call a recess. And if I had a gavel, I'd bang it loudly. All right. So that being said, we are recessed and I will be joining the Chair McLeod and her anxious committee very soon. So Chair, when would you like to call the meeting to order? What time?
We'll call the meeting at 5:20, please.
5:20. Good. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a